What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty, and welcome to another amazing video. You can follow me on Patreon for exclusive stories. 7 Pi Chapter 96. The Sandora River rapeseed flowers are on their way to Illuma. A camel team with 9 camels was walking forward unhurriedly. Sorata rests her back on a seat on the back of a camel, sipping wine leisurely. Not to mention, this camel is really comfortable to sit on. He will not use his feet to cross this vast desert like Juan Luffy and the others. After all, he's not short of money, is he? Ha ha. Thinking of this, Sorata put down the wine gourd, gave a low laugh, turned to look at the Firebird who was following him on the left, and asked, "By the way, Firebird, the sacred river of Alabasta, the Santora River, is right in front of you." "Okay." Firebird nodded. "Then how do we cross the river?" Firebird looked at Sorata and said with a smile, "Brother Silverhair, in front of you is Alabasta's famous oasis city, Illuma. Since we are going to the rainy land, we must inevitably cross the Santora River. They are all made of rapeseed flowers and detoured by sea. However, since there has been no rainfall in Alabasta for more than a year, this has caused the water level of the Sandora River to drop seriously, and it has fallen to the point where people can walk across it." "Oh." Sorata nodded, and turned her gaze to the front. They could already feel the wind mixed with moisture. "Okay." Sorata suddenly thought of something, turned to look at Firebird and asked, "It turns out that the owner of Rapeseed Flower, who rents camels, doesn't have a route to the side of the Sandora River." Yes." Firebird nodded, reached out and wiped the sweat on his forehead with his sleeve, put down his hand, and said to Sorata, "Originally the boss's business on the side of the Sandora River was taken care of by the boss's wife. It is in Illuma, the end point is the rainy land, the starting point here is the rapeseed flower, and the end point is the capital Albana. It's not just recently. The water level of the Santora River has dropped seriously. The boss just made up his mind and simply opened a route for rapeseed flowers to the rainy land. Don't look at Alabasta as a desert country, and it hasn't rained for more than a year, but the rainy land is the famous city blockade in the first half of the Grand Line. There is the largest casino in the country, which attracts countless foreigners to this country. Tourism and gambling in the rainy land." Firebird paused, and then said, "Because it belongs to the world's 3 major powers, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, and is known as the Sand Crocodile, Shah Lokdar, site, so it's safe, it's still trustworthy." Advertisement, K. Lokdal. Sorata withdrew her gaze, glanced at Firebird, then raised the wine gourd and took a sip. "You have been here for 4 months. You are a journalism major, so you must have collected a lot of news about Barlock's studio." "Okay." Firebird nodded, looked up and said, "I have collected a lot of criminal evidence from Barlock's studio, but they are all trivial things. The biggest one is just to prove that the rapeseed flower port dancing fan incident a few months ago it is related to this criminal group, but it cannot be effectively proved that they really did it." As he said that, he looked away, looked at Sorata, and said with shame in his eyes, "I'm sorry, silver-haired brother, because my strength is too low, although I also want to really collect the criminal evidence of the Barlock studio, but I am powerless. I've been staying in the rain for the past few months, and I've seen a lot of people from Barlock studio, but I haven't been able to find any valid evidence related to K. Lokdar and Barlock studio. I only know that Barlock studio the chief liaison who has been out there is a woman, not Clock Doll." "Fine." Sorata waved his hand and didn't care. Alabasta is not Bath, but a permanent member of the world government. He doesn't need the Firebirds to report like Bass did, he just needs to let the world know that the reason Alabasta doesn't rain is because of K. Lokdal. Even if it is not reported, it is actually fine, as long as Clock Dar dies, the Barlock studio will collapse in an instant, and the country will return to its original state. For the rest, he doesn't plan to pay attention to the Neferutali family in the world government. After all, the world government wants to move Alabasta, and it is also looking for a reason. There is no reason, they can't move, and the Neferutari family was originally one of the founders of the world government." Firebird looked at Sorata's completely nonchalant attitude and hesitated to speak. He thought, he might have misunderstood Sorata. Sorata sent him here 4 months ago, and he thought Sorata was asking him to collect criminal evidence from Barlocky's workshop and Clocadar. Thinking about it now, Sorata may have simply dismissed him at the time. Thinking of this, he shook his head, but he was not depressed. The friendship between him and Sorata is actually not deep, at most they can be regarded as acquaintances, not even friends, he still understands this. It is not bad for Sorata to find a reason to dismiss him. Besides, he is a reporter, as long as there is big news. In fact, he doesn't really care about Alabasta's domestic political issues, and of course, the world doesn't even care. Like most people, he only cares about the big news about the world-famous big pirates. If Sorata hadn't said something, he wouldn't have collected the criminal evidence of the Barlock studio. You must know that this group is a well-known criminal group in the first half of the Grand Line, even in the world. Advertisement investigate them, it's dangerous, okay? He has been close to being discovered by members of Barlock's studio many times. This is also thanks to his many years of reporter career and the concealment skills he has practiced. Otherwise, he might not have seen Sorata, and he was solved by the Barlock studio. Firebird put away his thoughts, of course he wouldn't tell Sorata about this. Talking about it can only prove that he is stupid and useless. No real benefit. He looked up, looked at the blue water shoreline gradually appearing in front of him, turned his head and shouted to Sorata who was leaning on the back of the camel. Brother Silverhair, the Sandora River is here. Okay. Sorata replied, straightened up, looked over the camel's head and looked forward. Looking at the endless azure blue in front of him, he felt emotional in his heart. Who would have thought that the desert kingdom, the desert island, would have such a large river with a width of more than 50 kilometers? If it weren't for the severe wind and sand on this island, Al Laboon would never be short of water. Behind Sorata, the three of Ahua all shrugged their heads, lying on the back of the camel, looking like dried salted fish. Although they have camels, they are not bad for water. But for the extremely dry air in the desert and the venomous sun above their heads, their spirits seemed to be buried by this desert. When I heard the sound coming from the front, the Firebird said that it had reached the Sandora River. The three of Ahua quickly straightened up, raised their heads with bright eyes and looked forward. Although they are all demon fruit power, they are afraid of water. But at this moment, I really hope to take a good cold bath. River. It's really a river. The three of Ahua, with their legs clamped on both sides of the camel, picked up the rein with both hands and shook it vigorously. Drive. They quickly crossed Sorata and rushed towards the Sandora River in the distance. Chapter 97. Ice tap tap tap. Tap tap tap. Dust was everywhere. Looking at the backs of the three of Ahua, Sorata pursed her lips. What can you guys do when you get to the river, and you can't swim, really? As he spoke, a popsicle appeared in his hand out of nowhere as if by a magic trick. He turned to look at Kuina on the camel on the right and asked with a smile. Well, Kuina, or not? Okay. Kuina looked at the popsicle in Sorata's hand, nodded, opened her mouth and stretched out her bright red tongue, licked it on her lips, her throat puffed up, and she swallowed. In this stove-like desert, there is a popsicle, which is simply the most delicious food in the world. No. Take it. Sorata handed the popsicle to Kuina. Gudu. Gugu. At this moment, the sound of swallowing saliva sounded from behind Sorata. Seeing Kuina taking the popsicle, Sorata quickly turned her head, met 4 pairs of longing eyes, and said with a smile. Well, do you want it to? Okokokok. Firebird and his 2 younger brothers nodded quickly and looked at Sorata expectantly. Calical. Captain, I'm human too, of course I want popsicles. Indigo grinned, staring at Sorata's hand with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Space fruits can freeze ice. Along the way, Sorata gave him the feeling that he was omnipotent, and he felt that the fruit of Sorata might not be as simple as a space-type fruit. In fact, as long as he asks, he can know that Sorata's ability is not devil fruit at all. Everyone on board knew it, but he didn't. Usually everyone is familiar with Sorata's ability, so no one discusses it, which leads to no one telling him. He didn't ask, and no one said anything, and that's how this phenomenon came about. But after getting along for a long time, I will always know in the future, don't worry. Sorata turned her head, the space field expanded instantly, and then shrank rapidly. Everyone just felt the air around them, as if being emptied by Sorata in an instant. A suction force made their bodies fall towards Sorata unstoppably. However, this suction came and went quickly, and before everyone could breathe, the surrounding air instantly filled the hole emptied by Sorata. Suck, call, everyone straightened up, sat on the back of the camel, and took a few breaths with their mouths open. At that moment just now, they felt a serious sense of suffocation. Although it was only for a moment, there was still a trace of horror in the eyes of everyone looking at Sorata. Advertisement, sorry. The moment Sorata was drawing air, he knew that he seemed reckless. He turned his head to face the crowd, apologized, and then said with a smile, to condense into ice, it can't be made out of thin air, it needs a lot of water molecules, I just evacuated the surrounding air, so I didn't scare you guys. Firebird let out a sigh of relief, looked at Sorata, waved his hands and said, it's okay, big silver-haired brother, hee. It's fine, haha. Sorata laughed awkwardly, turned her head, and went to make popsicles. In fact, making popsicles is very simple. As long as there are water molecules in the air, Sorata can use the space field to condense compressed air into water. Then the air in the domain is discharged to lower the air pressure in the domain. The lower the air pressure, the lower the temperature in the domain. In the end, the water will naturally freeze into ice. Everyone looked at Sorata, and saw that Sorata suddenly appeared in front of him like a magic trick, a blister filled with water, and then he did not see any other actions. Click. Kaka. The water was in front of Sorata, and it automatically and quickly froze into ice. With the thought in Sorata's mind, the ice cube in front of him quickly split into pieces, and then flew towards everyone automatically. Hmkai, are you sure you can eat this stuff? Sorata raised the popsicle in his hand and looked strangely at the camel, Eyelashes, whose head was stretched towards him. Hmkai. Eyelashes kept nodding, looking longingly at the popsicle in Sorata's hand. No, take it, don't blame me for heatstroke. He doesn't know if camels can eat ice, since this guy wants to eat it, let him eat it. Eyelash lowered his head, opened his mouth, and took the popsicle in Sorata's hand in one bite. The guy put the popsicle in his mouth without chewing, and shivered all over his body. There are happy smiles on the face. Sorata retracted her gaze from her eyelashes and shook her head. This guy is really human. It seems that in the world of One Piece, there are many animals with human nature. Take Alabasta as an example, he knows that there are as many as 5 kinds. Among them, the colored camel eyelashes and the fast-running, Karoo, can understand and respond to human words. By the way, There is also Kung Fu Manatee, it's also amazing. The Sandora River, the riverside, and the three of Ahua were soaked in the water, and their whole bodies went limp. On the shore, 3 camels were bending their necks, drinking water. Well, I said, you 3 guys, you run so fast, I don't see how comfortable you are. Tread tat tat. Sorata walked slowly to the river, and the camel stopped automatically. Advertisement. He sat on the camel, leaned forward, lay on the camel's neck, and looked down. The 3 Ahua people below, tauntingly, picked up an ice ball and threw it into their mouths. Click. He grinned so that the 3 of Ahua could see clearly. Cool, circle.operator. Oh circle.operator, ice. The 3 of Ahua looked at the ice in Sorata's mouth, were taken aback for a moment, and then wanted to get up excitedly. Crash. But, no matter how hard they struggled, they couldn't get up. They completely forgot that they were all demon fruit power, and foolishly soaked their whole bodies in the water. Ha 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 ha. Sorata looked at the funny actions of the 3 of Ahua and laughed. At this moment, Huo Nio and the others rode over on camels. Looking at the 3 struggling Ahua, he quickly jumped off the camel, rushed into the river, and pulled the 3 guys up. Thanks. The 3 of Ahua stood up very politely and bowed to the Firebird. Then quickly rushed to Sorata and grabbed the floating ice block in front of him. What? Just as their fingertips reached into the space in front of Sorata, they stopped suddenly, and then quickly backed away. You guys, you really dare to touch anything? Sorata stared at the fingertips of the 3 of Ahua with a funny face, and in an instant, their fingertips turned red from the cold. The 3 of them raised their hands, looked at the cold fingertips, and quickly opened their mouths to put them in their mouths. Looking up at Sorata, his eyes widened, and he gave Sorata a stare. You guys are so anxious, do you still blame me? Really? Sorata shook his head, jumped off the camel, and scattered before being compressed into the ultimate field. Boom, suddenly a gust of cold wind, with Sorata as the center, rushed towards the surroundings, making everyone shudder, and then the comfort of ultimate, as if suddenly entering spring from the hot summer. However, as soon as this cold wind blows past, it is quickly assimilated by the surrounding hot air. Before everyone was comfortable, hot air flowed from all directions, wrapping everyone inside again. Gudu. The 3 of Ahua, staring at the ice suspended in front of Sorata, swallowed in unison. Okay, now you can take it. In his current domain, the space on the first floor can be kept open without restriction. In this space, although he can't expand multiple layers of space to form a god-like feeling like a domain, some small things are still very convenient. Just like him now, as long as it is in his space, as long as it is not too heavy, he can float. Unlimited. Chapter 98. Destroyed city vessels. Sorata took a step forward, ignoring the 3 yelling doobie who got the ice cubes. He looked up at the Sandora River. Looking at the endless, blue, mirror-like calm river in front of him, there was a hint of wonder in his eyes. A river with an average width of 50 kilometers. It's really spectacular. He lowered his head and looked at the soles of his feet. As the water level dropped, he could not help squatting down, stretching out his hand, and picked up an orange-yellow agate stone with a smooth surface that looked like a gem. Stand up, lift the agate stone in your hand above your head, look up, through the sunlight, you can clearly see that the sun has printed a circle of light in the agate stone. This fine agate may have been picked up long ago in reality. Then in this world, on this river beach, it can be seen everywhere. Sorata put down her hand, threw the agate stone in her hand towards the distant river, and threw it casually. Boom. This water level. Sorata turned her head, looked at Firebird and asked, how can we get across this water level? Of course I can't get through here. Don't look at the severe drop in the water level of the Sandora River, but this is a big river with an average width of 50 kilometers. Look. Firebird pointed to the upstream direction and said, it's not far upstream, you can go there. From there is a layer of sand and gravel accumulation on the bottom of the river, which has been spreading from the source of the Santora River. From there, it starts to go down, it's deep water. And the position we are standing in now is actually the deep water area. Oh, Sorata nodded. He watched anime in his previous life and wondered, since there was such a wide river, why didn't Straw Hat Crew take a boat directly, but parked the boat outside Aluma and walked across the desert? It turns out that ships can only sail outside of Aluma. Further inside is the shallow water area, and the boat can't get through at all. Maybe the Sandora River could pass the boat when the water level didn't drop before, but it certainly can't now. Let's go, silver-haired brother, the camel knows the exact route. Okay. Sorata looked away, turned around, and stepped on the back of the camel. Let the camel go by itself. Advertisement. 2 hours later, the crowd rode camels and set foot on the beach on the other side of the Sandora River. What? Firebird held the rein, looked to the left, and said in surprise, I remember that there is an artificial canal here. Canal? Okay. Firebird withdrew his gaze, turned to Sorata and said, we just passed here a few days ago and went to the rapeseed flowers. In just a few days, this canal was buried by sand? Sand? Sorata followed the Firebird's gaze, looking at a ravine on the left that spread from the river to the depths of the desert, and looked thoughtful. He remembered that the destruction of the canal in Aluma turned this once beautiful oasis city into a desert within a desert, and forced the people here to move to other places. He heard Huo Nio introduce the itinerary and introduce Iluma. He thought that this place hadn't been destroyed yet, but he didn't expect to be met by them. Thinking of this, he stretched out his hand and patted the camel's neck. Drive. Let's go. Go to Love Luma first. As he said that, the camel under Sorata immediately started to move quickly along the canal, heading for the depths of the desert. Later, everyone looked at Sorata's back, shook the reins quickly, and quickly followed. On the camel's back, Sorata straightened up, staring at the distance, the only beautiful city with green inlaid in the yellow sand, with a murderous intent in her calm eyes. To destroy this canal, it is obviously not just a simple sandstorm. Only by completely destroying the embankment and the foundation stones laid on the bottom of the river can the canal really disappear. People just want to clean up the sand and make the river work again, but they can't do it. Only in this way can the civilians of Iluma completely despair. In his opinion, to achieve this level, only two people in the Bar Lock studio can do it. One is K. Lock himself, and the other is Dorothy, who ate the zone mole fruit, that is, Issrry Christus, the partner of R4. If Lock Dar did it, he'd probably have gone back to the Rainlands. However, if it is Dorothy, those two guys are probably still in love with Luma. Lock Doll may not be very interested in the expressions of these victims. But for these two little guys, it's not necessarily the case. After all, criminals will spend a lot of time at the scene of a crime, enjoying the panic caused by their actions. Advertisement tap tap tap. Tap tap tap. Amidst the smoke and dust, Sorata rushed into the streets of Iluma first. He pulled the reins, stopped the camel, and looked to the left. I saw the side of the canal on the left, surrounded by people. They ignored the arrival of Sorata and his gang, and all stared anxiously at the bottom of the canal. From time to time, there was a sound of cursing from the crowd. Sorata jumped off the camel and walked towards the crowd. Sorata, this city doesn't seem too good. Kuina quickly followed Sorata, walked up to him, turned her head to him and said, I feel that this city, and the people in this city, are all full of panic. Okay. Sorata nodded, and said as he walked. Someone cut off the blood vessels of this city, causing this city to dry up, here. Yes, dead city. Sorata looked at the section of the canal that had been cleared out, and saw that the embankment of the canal and the bottom of the river were covered with countless round potholes. He paused slightly, and then said, this place will soon become a dead city. It's really courting death, it's really them. Because the canal disappeared, the water in the city, for the people here, could not last for many days at all. One of the young men threw away the hoe in his hand, sat down on the ground, looked up at the sky, tears streaming down his face, and his eyes were full of despair. There is only a new canal. At this time, what Iluma lacks most is time. In such a scene, not to mention the villagers here, even he is helpless. You really didn't leave? As long as no one stops K-Lock Dar, the drought in Alabasta will continue for nearly 2 years. Without the water source of the canal, no matter how unwilling the people who love Luma, they can only abandon this place and move to other places in the end. I saw a few young and middle-aged men, covered in dust, looking at the semicircular deep pit exposed at the bottom of the river. But building a canal will take time. Damn it, what is it? Walking outside the crowd, Sorata stretched out his hand and held Kuina. The outer space of his body was like a cone-shaped hood, automatically separating the crowd on both sides, allowing them to easily pass through the crowd as if they were in no man's land, standing on the edge of the canal. At this moment, in the canal, there was a roar full of despair. Feeling the countless panics coming from all around, Sorata withdrew her gaze, her eyes flashed red, and observation hockey swept across the entire Iluma in an instant. Chapter 99 Reason the red light in Sorata's eyes disappeared. Raising his head, looking at the second floor of a house across the canal, murderous intent flashed in his eyes. What's wrong? Kuina felt Sorata's murderous intent, held Sorata's hand tightly, and looked at him sideways. Just 2 mice. Mouse? Sorata looked away, turned to Kuina and said, well, it's a mouse. As he spoke, he pointed to the potholes in the canal, and continued. These potholes were caused by that mouse. Then go and catch him, not urgent. Sorata took Kuina by the hand, turned around, and walked outside. It's going to be dark soon, let's find a hotel. Those 2 mice can't escape either. Okay. Kuina looked back, the red light in her eyes disappeared in the direction Sorata was looking at just now. She unconditionally believes in any decision Sorata makes. After getting out of the crowd and meeting up with my partners, Sorata and the others led the camels, walked into Iluma, found a hotel, and stayed. This was originally a beautiful oasis city, and the canal has just been destroyed. Although it is not as prosperous as the port city of rapeseed flowers, there are still many tourists and it is very lively. Although people in the city are worried about the destruction of the canal, they also show great enthusiasm to entertain every tourist who comes here. In the hotel, Sorata and his team chose the room under the guidance of the waiter. After putting down their luggage, they went to the tavern on the first floor of the hotel. The tavern is a big open tavern. Because it is close to the sunset, people come and go, so it is very lively. After ordering the dishes, while waiting for the dishes, Sorata saw the boss alone in a daze at the bar, so she walked over and wanted to have a chat with him. Boss. Sorata sat on the rotating round stool in front of the bar, put his hands on the bar, and greeted the boss. Boss. Seeing that the boss was still in a daze and ignored him, he couldn't help but increase his voice and shouted again. Advertisement, okay. The boss was shocked and came back to his senses in an instant. He looked at Sorata, put down the wine glass he was wiping in his hand, and bowed to Sorata to apologize. Ah, sorry, guest, I was a little dazed just now. Fine. Sorata waved his hand and said to the boss, Boss, give me a drink first. Okay. The boss turned around, raised his head and scanned the wine cabinet behind the bar a few times, and finally stopped at a bottle. When he looked at the bottle, he knew it was expensive. He hesitated for a moment, but reached out and took down the bottle of wine. Then he turned around, picked up the rag on the bar, and gently wiped the bottle of wine without any dust. Boss, I think you are very reluctant to part with this bottle of wine. Sorata looked at the bottle in the boss's hand curiously, and asked, is there any story about this bottle? This bottle of wine. The boss put down the rag and looked at the wine bottle with memories in his eyes. This bottle of wine is the only one in this store. It was left over when the store opened. He is like an old friend of mine. He has been with me since I was a child. After finishing speaking, the boss shook his head, but it's like everyone has a time to say goodbye, let alone a bottle of wine? Even this city, it's time to say goodbye. The boss put down the wine bottle, and looked out of the window through the golden sunset shining through the window, looking at the whole of Illuma, with a sad emotion permeating his body. Just like Illuma at this time, the city's blood vessels were broken, and he was about to dry up and die. Sorata turned her head, followed the boss's gaze, and looked out the window. The touch of green on the coconut tree outside the window is probably the last bloom of Illuma. He could sense that the city seemed to be crying. It is indeed sad, but as long as there is rain, and enough time, this place should. No, it is sure to keep his last beauty and make it even more beautiful. So, there was one more reason for him to kill Clockadar. Boo! The aroma of wine was overflowing, which attracted Sorata to turn her gaze to the boss. The boss gently picked up the wineglass that had been wiped before, first placed it in front of Sorata, and then took out another wineglass from under the bar and placed it in front of himself. Advertisement, guest, let me treat you to this glass of wine today. It's time for this tavern, which has been open for hundreds of years, to close down. As he spoke, he raised the wine bottle in his hand, with the mouth of the bottle hanging above the glass, tilted his wrist, and slowly poured the wine in the bottle towards the glass. I only heard the sound of hululu, as if it was beating on the hearts of the two of them at this time. As the wine in the glass rose, the sound like a wind instrument was very pleasant. The boss stopped and the voice disappeared. In the wine glass in front of Sorata, the wine was just right, not too much and not too little. A person who is willing to do things and has done such things for a lifetime, even pouring wine, can touch people's hearts in this way, and it is also a skill to make such an extremely ordinary thing in life, such as pouring wine, subtle and ultimate. Obviously, the boss is a master in this way. The boss withdrew his hand, filled the wine glass in front of him in the same manner, and then gently placed the wine bottle in his hand on the bar on his right, sank down, and sat on the stool inside the bar. He raised his head, looked at Sorata, pointed to the wine glass in front of Sorata, please. Sorata withdrew his gaze, raised his head, and met the boss's eyes. He could see countless vicissitudes from these eyes. The boss has opened a tavern here all his life. He has experienced everything. The only thing he can let go of is this tavern, the city. He could see the breath of death from the depths of his calm eyes. He should stay and live and die here. In fact, the world of One Piece not only has magnificent rivers and mountains, but also a sea so vast that it covers the entire world, all kinds of gorgeous scenery that make people nostalgic, and countless strange animals. In this real world, more is actually the thick history of this world, and all kinds of evocative stories in the history. This time is mainly because of his absence. Illuma will definitely become history, and the people in this city, this tavern, will disappear in the boundless torrent of history like a river flowing into the sea. Thanks. Sorata didn't say much to the boss. He picked up the wine glass in front of him, brought it to his mouth, and took a sip gently. Now, there is another reason for him to kill Clockadar. The boss looked at Sorata, the corners of his mouth turned up, and a smile appeared on his face. Opening a tavern is nothing but satisfying the guests and making him happier. Now that he had made a decision in his heart, he also looked away. No matter what the future holds, at least for now. He wanted to treat him well. The guy in front of him, who he had only met once but didn't know why, made him willing to take out the oldest wine in this store to entertain him. Thinking of this, the boss shook his head, picked up the wine bottle in front of him, and looked up at Sorata. Boy, let's toast. It is good. Sorata put down his wineglass and looked at the boss, with the corner of his mouth raised, showing the same smile as the boss. Clang, the wine glass trembled, and the sound was pleasant. Chapter 100 Ling Kai. After the last ray of the sun's brilliance also fell into the horizon, the whole world was not plunged into darkness. The sky is full of stars and the full moon hangs high. The soft reflected light made the whole world as bright as day. Of course, the brighter one is the unextinguished lamp of Illuma. In the whole of Illuma, the lights of every house are brightly lit, and none of them want to go to bed so early. On the streets, under the eaves, under the big trees, you can see people discussing loudly everywhere. They are not complaining, but discussing when and where to go. The whole of Alabasta is in drought, except for the capital, the rainy land, and the port city of rapeseed flowers. Other places may be better than Alabasta at most, but it is impossible to be much better. And Guodu, Udi, rapeseed flower, these three cities are big cities with a large population. They are afraid that they will not be able to find a place to live if they go. Because the refugees in Alabasta go to these three places the most. And of course, overseas. But, here is the Grand Line. No one can understand the dangers of the Grand Line better than those of them who live on the Grand Line. So no one wants to go to sea unless necessary. Of course, no one wants to leave this desert, which they have lived and lived for generations, and love so much. Sorata led Kuina, and walked towards the canal in response to the countless discussions on both sides. After drinking and eating, Sorata and the others divided into several groups and went to play separately. After all, this is their first time to spend the night in the desert. Seeing the beautiful night and sky immediately dispelled their tiredness during the day. It would be a pity if they didn't go for a good stroll. Through the crowd and across the bridge, Sorata and Kuina stood outside the house they had seen earlier. The house is the same as most of the houses here. It is divided into 2 floors. The door on the first floor is closed and no light can be seen. The second floor is brightly lit. Film. Let's go. Go up. Sorata pulls Kuina and lifts her feet up. Boom. The feet stay in the air, just like stepping on a real ladder. Kuina followed Sorata's footsteps, up, her feet firmly in the air. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The two of Sorata finally stopped on the void outside the window on the second floor. Looking silently at the closed windows, advertisement. What kind of death should be given to them? Sorata murmured. Doing such evil things may not cause direct death, but in the days to come, it has caused countless deaths. Who? In the room, on the sofa behind the tall figure, sat a fat old woman with a short stature who was seriously inconsistent with his partner's height. The old woman's crimson hair was fluffed back and tied tightly at the scalp with a green kerchief. Wearing purple sunglasses on his face, purple lips, plump chin, cheeks bulging to both sides. Looked like a mouse. The old woman is a senior agent of Barlock Studio. The company codename is ISSRRY Christas. Her real name is unknown, and the tall figure next to him is her partner, R4. Not only is there a huge difference in height between the two, but there is also a huge difference in personality. ISS Merry Christmas is a quick-tempered old woman, but R4 is a person who moves slowly and speaks very slowly. Next to R.4 lay a dog that looked like a large dachshund. This dog is a combination of rare objects in the world of One Piece and Devil Fruit. It is a gun that eats Zone Go Fruit dachshund form, named Lasso, perfect teamwork. Who? R.4 followed the eyes of ISS Merry Christmas to the window, looked at the 2 black shadows cast on the curtain under the moonlight. He slowly opened his mouth, and slowly shouted out following ISS Merry Christmas. Boom. Ice Merry Christmas retracted her gaze, and put the tea brewed by the top tea, orange baijiao, in her hand on the tea table in front of her. Then he cursed loudly at R4. What a pig, a pig, a pig. With that said, she stood up, walked to the window, and opened the curtains. In Alabasta, she fears no one. Don't look at them. Lock Studio is just a criminal organization, but this criminal organization is the largest criminal organization in the first half of the Grand Line. Although she doesn't know who most of the people in the organization are, it is undeniable that they are in the Lock Studio, which is very large and of course very strong. An impatient ISS Merry Christmas opened the curtains, and when he saw the 2 figures outside, his whole body froze in place. She put down the curtain in her hand, lowered her head in disbelief, reached out and rubbed her eyes, then raised her head. A gust of cold air rushed straight from the soles of the feet to tingling, making her shiver. The sweat on his body, like pimples, kept coming out, soaking his whole body in a short while, making her look as if she had just been picked out of the water. She stared out of the window, her eyes widened, her pupils contracted into a single point, her raised hand kept shaking, and finally her whole body trembled. And her feet kept moving back. Advertisement. The mouth that used to talk nonstop now seems to be sealed, unable to utter a single sentence, and can only keep screaming loudly and terrified. Their Baylock Studio is for intelligence, so how could they not know who the 2 figures outside the window are? She would never have thought that she would meet such a big shot here. For ordinary pirates, even forces, he certainly doesn't have to be afraid. But, looking at the 2 figures outside the window, can she not be afraid? This guy has never let a pirate go to sea so far. She is not a pirate, but she is a criminal. Their Baylock Studio is the Grand Line, the largest criminal group in the front section. She didn't believe that Sorata and Sorata came here to play with them. Obviously, Sorata found out about their destruction of the canal, so she came to them. The blood stained the glass, and the glass reflected the light, turning the whole room red. I don't want to know your past, I don't want to care about your future, and I don't want to know whether you're obeying orders. All I know is that at this moment, you deserve to die. It's not over yet. Then, countless shards of glass, like countless sharp swords, quickly shot at the 2 inside and outside. ISS Merry Christmas and R4's body froze in place, looking at the countless broken pieces like sharp swords. The mind was terrified to ultimate. Puff 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 puff. Flesh was ripped open and blood spattered everywhere. After the countless glass swords slashed across the bodies of the 2, they turned in the air and rushed towards them again. Click. Caw, caw. The glass of the window shattered into pieces under the sound of grinding teeth, but the pieces did not fall to the ground, but were suspended in the air. They wanted to hide and struggle hard, but the space around their bodies seemed to be solid, sealing their bodies inside, so that they could only watch helplessly as countless sharp swords made of glass slid past their bodies. For such criminal organization personnel, Sorata has no mercy. Give them Lingxi directly. Otherwise, with the identity of Sorata, it would be impossible to come to find a little guy like them. Then, under Sorata's indifferent eyes, he turned around and faced the room sideways. Move. Chapter 101 Unexpected Surprise on the Roof. Kuina sat on the eaves with her legs dangling in the air, looking up at the moon and endless stars in the sky. And Sorata was lying beside her, with her head resting on his lap, holding a gourd of wine, taking a sip from time to time. Sorata. Okay. Sorata looked up and looked at Kuina's chin. What's wrong? Kuina lowered her head, her mirror-like pupils glowed coldly under the moonlight, and her black hair slid down naturally, covering the sky full of stars. She met Sorata's eyes and said softly, I can feel that you have been suppressing something since I met the Maka Kingdom cruise ship, me. As she said that, she raised her head, stretched out her right hand, and grabbed the moon in the sky. Although I hate that king very much, of course I really want to draw a sword to kill people, but Sorata. She withdrew her hand, looked down at Sorata, her eyes were gentle and firm. You told me since I was a child, we don't need to be responsible for the world in our life, we only need to be responsible for ourselves. There are too many evil things in this world, we should not, but I am trapped in a passing incident in my life. As he spoke, the corners of his mouth turned up, and on this moonlit night, he showed a smile that amazed the sky. You said, right? Sorata stared at Kuina's smile for a moment. He felt that Kuina was glowing at this moment. Looking at it, the corners of his mouth turned up, a smile appeared on his face. He reached out and took Kuina's hand, letting his hand cover his face. In the past few days, he has indeed had a hostility in his heart that has nowhere to vent. In the past, he killed people with an attitude of indifference, but today, he left ISS Merry Christmas and R4 alive. During this period, he actually felt happy, which made him feel conflicted and confused. When did he start to disrespect life? Even if the other party is a bad guy, even if the other party is a weak person. Even if he sent the other party to hell, he shouldn't feel happy, at most he would be indifferent. Letting go of Kuina's hand, he sat up, stretched out his hand, pulled Kuina into his arms, hugged her soft body, raised the wine gourd and took a big sip, looking up at the extremely bright moon, softly rode. Kuina, thank you. Hearing the sound, Kuina smiled even more. She rubbed her head in Sorata's arms, found a more comfortable position, hugged Sorata, and narrowed her eyes. After resting for a while, feeling the increasingly cold air around him, Sorata patted Kuina on the back and stood up. Let's go. The night in the desert is very cold, and we have to go on the road tomorrow, so we need to rest well. As he spoke, he bent down and pulled Kuina up, led her, and stepped towards the void in front of him. Tread, advertisement. Just when the two of Sorata's feet stepped on the ground, a layer of ripples appeared on the ground of the house behind them, and then the ground was like quicksand, silently and slowly swallowing the house, while the rest of the houses are not affected at all. Let's go. Sorata took Kuina's hand and walked towards the hotel, ignoring behind her. What? Sorata seemed to have thought of something, and stopped suddenly. He turned around and looked at the house that had been half swallowed by quicksand, and said, I almost forgot your existence. As he spoke, he had a thought, and saw a long-barreled gun flying out of the window of the house. Snapped, Sorata took the gun, turned around and looked at Kuina's curious eyes, raised the gun in his hand and said with a smile, this thing is a rare thing in the whole world. Oh. Kuina held Sorata's arm in her arms, and followed him forward, staring curiously at the gun in Sorata's hand while walking, and asked, it's strange, what's so strange about a gun? She looked left and right, but she didn't see anything strange about this gun. Isn't this just an ordinary gun? Haha, this is no ordinary gun. It's not an ordinary gun, isn't it a gun? What's so special about it? This stuff. Sorata raised the gun and said with a smile, this thing has eaten Devil Fruit's gun. When he talked about Devil Fruit, the gun in his hand seemed to come alive instantly, trembling in his hand. It's a gun that eats Devil Fruit and has no low IQ. Although it has done many bad things with its master R.4, it has never seen such a powerful and cruel person. You must know that the body of its owner is still in the house behind, and it is not cold yet. It has witnessed the devil-like execution method with its own eyes. It thought it would be able to escape the demon by changing back to its original body, but unexpectedly he found it out, and he also knew that it ate Devil Fruit. This guy might not be human at all, but a real demon with human skin on his head. Thinking of this, its body trembled even more. Look, this guy is shaking non-stop. Yeah, it's amazing. Advertisement. Kuina looked at the gun in Sorata's hand, with deep curiosity in his eyes. It's the first time I've seen Devil Fruit's gun. Okay, stop shaking, we won't eat you again. Sorata's hand holding the barrel of the gun slightly tightened. It's shaking, go to hell. The gun stopped shaking immediately, that's good. Seeing that the gun in his hand was no longer trembling, Sorata handed it to Kuina. Didn't that guy Aluo always complain that he didn't have a good gun? Just find him a gun this time. It may be the only one in this world. A gun, he should be satisfied now. Kuina took the gun, turned it over and over to look at it a few times, saw that it was just an ordinary gun, and gradually lost interest. She returned the gun to Sorata and said with a smile, with this gun, Arlo's marksmanship should be improved. I don't know yet. Sorata took the gun, pinned it to his waist, looked at the civilians on both sides of the street, and said with a smile, after all, I don't know the specific purpose of this gun. It's up to Arlo to get familiar with this gun. Only after that can we truly display the power of this gun. He really didn't know the specific purpose of this gun. In the anime, this gun has always existed in the shape of a dog. Of course, that form is not suitable for Arlo. But this guy's body is a long-barreled gun, so it may be turned into a sniper rifle. With this gun and the incomparable bullets in the gun, which are as powerful as cannonballs, and they are infinite bullets, I believe that Arlo's strength will be improved quickly, and he will truly achieve the level of the world's top shooter. Thinking of this, he happily tore off the wine gourd, raised his head and took a few sips. This gun was actually an unexpected surprise. He didn't expect this gun at all at first. After all, this thing in anime has always been a dog. More like a cannon barrel than a gun. And his goals tonight are mainly the two people ISS Merry Christmas and R4. How could he pay attention to this thing that was originally insignificant to him? Although this thing is indeed miraculous, it is useless at all, so naturally he doesn't pay attention to it. But when he saw this guy's body, he unexpectedly found that this thing was very suitable for a Luo. So this guy is a surprise. Since it was a surprise, of course I was happy. Chapter 102 Dark Hound. In the vast golden desert, a group of camels are lined up, facing the wind and sand and the sun, heading towards the unknown land without any haste. Jingle bell, jingle bell. During the march, the bells on the camel's neck kept ringing like wind chimes. This kind of sound, in this boundless desert, is clear and sweet, like an epic performance. Boom! In front of the camel team on the left, a small sand dune was suddenly flattened by a bullet. Yes, it is a bullet, but this bullet is a bit special, not the dark black of metallic luster, but a translucent color with silvery light between reality and reality. Behind the camel team, a Luo stared at his eyes. The red light in his eyes gradually disappeared, his face was flushed, and he was in a state of extreme excitement. He put down his hand, retracted his eyes and looked down at the gun in front of him. The joy in his eyes was almost overflowing. Sorata guessed right. The gun in Arlo's hand was picked up by Sorata last night. After a night of training, the gun in the shape of a sausage that ate the dog fruit changed completely in a Luo's hands. I saw that the gun in Arlo's hand at this time was no longer the snot-nosed, sluggish dog from before. Instead, it turned into a gun with a thin body and the size of a long-barreled gun. The head of the barrel looked like a dog's head, a vicious dog's head. Although the gun has become smaller in a Luo's hands, the power of the bullets fired has not decreased. On the contrary, due to the great change in appearance, the bullets have not only changed in size, but also changed in color, making this kind of space between virtual and real. The translucent bullets in between not only did not weaken the lethality, but increased by more than one level. Fart. Awa put down the water bottle in his hand, turned to look at a Luo, and pushed the frame. You guys, you've been playing for a long time, haven't you had enough? As he spoke, he moved his eyes down, staring at the gun in Arlo's hand, and pursed his mouth. Ha 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 ha. Aluo put away the gun in his hand, hung it on his waist, and glanced at Awa. In the past, he would push back whatever he said to Awa, no matter good or bad, but today. He withdrew his gaze, took out the water bag from the cloth bag behind the camel with his right hand, raised his head and drank a few sips, held the gun handle in his left hand, and never let go. His eyes and heart were full of joy. Calical. In front of Arlo, Indigo turned his head, looked at Arlo and smiled. Allo. Okay. Arlo looked up and looked at Indigo. What's the matter, Dr. Indigo? Your gun. You haven't named it yet. Indigo looked down, looked at the gun on Arlo's waist, and said with a smile, don't you give it a name? Name it. Arlo glanced down at the gun, then raised his head, looked past Indigo, looked at Sorata at the front, and shouted, Sorata. Okay. Sorata was lying on the camel's back, his body rose and fell with the camel. Without turning his head, he asked loudly, what's wrong? Does this gun have a name? The gun was given to him by Sorata last night. He didn't believe that such a miraculous gun would be discovered by Sorata by accident. It should have been found somewhere by Sorata and Kuina when they played separately last night. Could have been snatched from that bad guy too. Advertisement. He doesn't care about these, he just wants to know, does Sorata know the name of this gun? Sorata raised his right hand on his forehead to shade the sun, rubbed his chin and thought about it. He remembered that this gun had a name. As for the name, the devil knows. In the anime, this guy is just one of the dragons. If it weren't for this guy being the only 5 in One Piece who ate one of Devil Fruit's items and was the first one to appear, ghosts would remember this guy. So Sorata doesn't know this guy's name. He raised his right hand and waved it to the back. This gun is yours now, and it will always be your partner in the future, so it doesn't matter what his original name is. Sorata took out the wine gourd with his left hand, flicked off the stopper with his thumb, and lifted it above his head. The mouth of the gourd rested above his lips, tilted, and the transparent wine flowed down the mouth of the gourd slowly, and flowed into Sorata's mouth through the air. Goo-goo. The Adam's apple squirmed, and the wine flowed down his throat, non-stop. Putting down the wine gourd, Sorata let out a breath of alcohol and shouted loudly, Aluo. Okay. Partner's name, choose one yourself. Arlo withdrew his gaze, raised his right hand, took a sip of water, then covered the lid of the kettle, put it back in the cloth bag at the back, lowered his head, looked at the gun in his left hand, and stroked his chin in thought. What's the name? Gundog. At this moment, Adao patted the camel and took a step forward, walking with Aluo. He tilted his head and looked at the gun in Aluo's hand. How is the dog? Didn't your gun eat the fruit of a dog? It's another gun, and the Gundog is just right. As Adao said, she nodded, looked up at Aluo, and said with a smile. How is it? Looking at you, I can't think of any good name, so why not use mine? I think it fits the occasion. Ha ha. After Adao finished speaking, she raised her hand, took a few deep breaths with a cigarette in her mouth, and looked at Aluo expectantly. What a good name you are. Before Aluo could answer, Ahua's voice came from behind them. Ahua patted the back of the camel's neck, stepped forward quickly, and walked side by side with Aluo. He glanced at Aluo, then looked past Aluo, and looked at Adao. If you want me to say, this gun should be called a dog gun. As he spoke, he retracted his gaze, stretched out his fat stomach, and made himself sit more comfortably, then looked at Aluo and said, after all, he ate devil fruit's gun, so devil fruit should be in front, are you right? Alo. That's right. Adao put down her hand, and sprayed on Awa, letting the shredded tobacco in her mouth flow out along the corner of her mouth. A gun is a gun. How can devil fruit be ahead? Do you know common sense? Yes, I don't understand. You are the only one who understands, right? Then let me ask you, is it better to hear the gun dog or the dog gun? Anyway, I think the dog gun sounds better. It sounds good, I think the gun dog is the best one. Dog gun dog gun. Advertisement. Calcalcalcock. Indigo laughed loudly, watching Adao and Awa talking to each other, completely unaware of this topic, and he was the first to speak. All right. Arlo put down his hands, raised his head, and roared. Adao and Awa looked at each other, and turned their heads together, as if they were not arguing at all, then took out the kettle, took a sip, and turned to look at Aluo, wanting to see what name Aluo could have. Arlo straightened up, raised the gun with his left hand, put the gun on his right shoulder, grasped the handle of the gun with his right hand, hooked the trigger with his index finger, and said firmly, since Sorata gave such a precious gun to me, then I must be worthy of this gun, so. He tilted his head, his eyes met the scope that was added to the back of the gun last night, his eyes blinked red, his weapon color was wrapped around the bullet in the barrel, and his index finger was hard. Snapped, there was no flame or smoke. A translucent bullet glowing with black light rushed out of the barrel, as if piercing through space, and disappeared from everyone's sight in an instant. What, at this moment, there was a very shrill scream from the direction where Arlo just shot the bullet. Then, boom, the flames flourished, one shot. This is simply like a cannonball, and it is still a cannonball with extremely strong penetrating power and speed. Ha 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 ha. Wong, a boat. Everyone stretched out their hands to cover their foreheads, looked at the huge pit in the distance, and the half-burning scorpion beside the huge pit, and swallowed. They knew that this thing was very strong, but they didn't expect that after adding armament hockey, it could be so strong. Arlo heard the voice from Dark Hound, held up Dark Hound, and kept laughing. Dark Hound? In front of the camel team, Sorata was drinking, with the corners of his mouth raised and a smile on his face. Ha 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 ha. You must be very happy too, then it settled. In the depths of the desert on the front left, a huge scorpion with only half of its body left was blown out of the desert by the sudden explosion. Following the scorpion came a shockwave with sand in it. Really NB? Where is the bullet that shot out? Is this thing a gun? This translucent bullet, as long as there is no color of knowledge, it can't be found. Arlo ignored everyone's surprise. He put down his gun, raised his head and laughed loudly. I'll call you, Dark Hound, from now on. Dark Hound who comes from the underworld and harvests life. What this thing looks like in a naval battle has already emerged in their minds. Chapter 103 The Future or the Present, which one is scarier? Juba. A trading center west of Alabasta, a large oasis town. But at this time, this former Western trade center, important trading town, and good vacation spot, Juba, is facing the fate of drying up. Originally, with the water source of Yuba Oasis and the unique underground hot spring water, even if it does not rain, it can last for a long time. But this place seems to have been abandoned by the desert god. Since a year ago, not only has it not rained here, but sandstorms have been blowing from time to time. For more than a year, sandstorms have completely swallowed this once beautiful oasis and completely dried it up. At this time, the civilians in this town basically left for other cities, and those who stayed basically joined the rebel army. So here, again, is Alabasta, the stronghold of the rebel army. There is no water. I believe it won't be long before even the rebel army will abandon this completely dry city. Juba. Out of town. In the place where the oasis used to be, an old man and a young man, with their backs facing each other, raised their hoes and kept digging in the sand. The old man was wrapped in a coat. His hair and beard were white. Judging from the wrinkles on the old man's face, the old man should have been a rich man, but at this moment, he was gradually drying up like this town. The young man was bare-chested, with a windshield hanging around his neck, dark tea-green short hair, and a small vertical scar on his left eye. The young man is the leader of the Alabasta rebel army, Kosha, at this time. The old man is the boy's father, Duodo. They are all members of Building Juba. Why can Juba become an important trading town in the west and a tourist destination? Not because there is a huge oasis here. It was 9 years ago that Dodo brought Kosha and countless people here to jointly develop the place, which made the place gradually prosperous. Clang. Dodo stopped, turned his head to stare at Kosha's back, frowned slightly, and said seriously, "Don't doubt, Kosha." Kosha continued digging, ignoring Dodo. In the past few months, he has asked himself countless times in his heart whether it is right to do so, but every time he hears about the death of a town, his will is raised and his heart becomes firmer. Seeing that Kosha ignored him, Dodo turned around, faced Kosha, and said, "You should also be very clear that His Majesty the King is a man of character." Clang. Ko Sha stopped digging, lowered his head, and said calmly, "The people who say that are all elderly people." Advertisement. As he spoke, he raised his hoe and continued to dig the sand. "The reason why I came to Juba with you, Dad, is not for the king." "I know." Dodo put the hoe flat, sat on it, looked at Kosha with a smile and said, "It's okay, haha. As long as it rains, the strange rumors will definitely stop." Clang. Kosha paused, put down the hoe, and put his right hand on the handle of the hoe. "I really want to trust the king, but..." Kosha turned his head and looked at Dodo. "It's only been a few months, and the rebel army now has nearly 100,000 people." He paused as he spoke. Images of countless people fighting for water sources appeared in his mind, and then he said, "And now people are dead, unless it rains immediately in this damn weather, otherwise." He didn't go on, but Dodo knew what he meant. Dodo stood up, looked at Koza, the son he was once proud of, but now he was an idiot, and said again, "Don't doubt, Koza." Kosha looked at Dodo for a while, but did not answer Dodo's words. He turned around, bent down and grabbed the handle of the hoe with both hands, and continued to dig up the sand. Looking at the sand-covered oasis, he couldn't help but think of the scene when he rushed to the capital and met the king a few months ago when he knew about the incident of our **** flower dancing powder. He really didn't want to doubt the king, but this country, countless people in this country are suffering from drought and hunger at this time. He knew that there were a lot of dancing fans in the palace. Even if he believed in the king, most young people in this country no longer believed in their king. He wanted to ask the king for dancing powder to use in other dry towns, but was refused. His idea was actually very simple at the beginning: just use a little, it shouldn't matter much, as long as it does rain. Perhaps the rebellion in other towns can be stopped. But the king disagreed, and there was nothing he could do. He didn't understand why the king had the means to make it rain. Why not use it? He knew that using dancing powder would bring disaster. Wouldn't there be no disaster if he didn't use it? Just look at this country. Check out the towns and cities of the country. Take a look at what was once an oasis in this country, now an empty city. Look at the countless people who rose up and resisted in order to compete for water. Could it be that the disaster that has not yet happened in the future is really more terrifying than the disaster that is happening now? He does not know. All he knew was that he couldn't stand it anymore. He couldn't bear to look at the blood of the city that was gradually drying up, and the countless people living in the city that were drying up. So, he has to resist, he has to fight, he has to take the reign himself. At this moment, a young man wearing goggles rushed over from the streets of the town. When he got close, he slammed on the brakes and stopped on the spot. Ko Sha. Advertisement. Clang. Kosha stopped, straightened up, turned his head, looked at the panting girl with her hands on her knees, and said, "What's wrong, Gaibi?" Sucked. Gaibi took a deep breath, then straightened his body, looked at Kosha, and said seriously, "Kosa. Iluma just sent the news that Iluma is dry." "Okay." Kosha put down his hoe, straightened up, and stared at Gaibi with disbelief on his face. "How could Iloma dry up? It's the biggest oasis in Alabasta, which is called the City of Oasis." Dodo also turned his head to look at Gaibi and asked, "How can it be dry there?" He stared at Gaibi, and asked excitedly, "Where is the man-made canal of the Sandora River? If the Sandora River does not dry up, how can it dry up?" Guy took a look at Dodo, then turned to look at Koza. The Saint Dora River was destroyed by people. Boom. Like a bolt from the blue, Kosha and Dodo froze in place at the same time. It was destroyed by someone. They could already imagine how panicked the people who loved Luma were at this time. It has not rained for more than a year, and the already dry oasis, if there is no water diversion from the canal. Kosha put down his hoe, turned around, and walked towards Gaibi. Can no longer hesitate. He didn't know who destroyed Iluma. He only knows that if it doesn't rain, this country will get worse and worse. It is necessary to resist. Even if dancing fans really bring disaster, he doesn't care anymore. After all, it's a matter of the future. He only wants the present, and he just wants to make it really rain on this gradually drying up Alabasta. "Kosha, where are you going?" Dodo looked at Kosha's back and hurriedly shouted, "Kosha, don't do stupid things, don't doubt. I believe that it will really rain in Alabasta soon, as long as it rains, as long as it rains." Seeing his idiot son Kosha ignoring him, Dodo stopped where he was. Tears fell like rain. He had a feeling that Kosha might not come back after he left. He has always believed that Alabasta will definitely rain, and he has always believed in their king. Because their king is so kind and loves the people so much. He believed in him and would never do anything that would harm the country or the people. Chapter 104. Trust and Innocence. Jingle bell, jingle bell. At this moment, from the desert outside Juba, there was a burst of bells that Dodo was very familiar with. He put away the despair in his eyes, wiped away his tears, turned around, faced the afterglow of the setting sun, and looked at the sand dunes outside Juba. I saw a caravan of camels climbing up the sand dunes from the faintly distorted air and heading towards this side. When he got close, Duo Tuo's eyes flickered when he saw the person on the camel clearly. Judging from the skin color of Sorata and others, he knew that the people in Sorata's team must not be from Alabasta. He raised his head and met Sorata's blue pupils, and there was a flash of surprise in his eyes. He had never seen such beautiful eyes. Sorata's pupils were like nebula glowing coldly in the setting sun. In Dodo's view, is so charming. He quickly withdrew his gaze and kept staring at people, which is not very polite behavior. His eyes moved down slightly, and he saw that it was the camel team. The leader, Sorata, said, "The guests must not be from Alabasta." Okay. Sorata nodded in acknowledgement. "At this time, come to Alabasta. I think you must not know about Alabasta." "No, no." Dodo looked at Sorata, a trace of doubt flashed across his face. "Yeah, I know." Sorata lowered her head and looked at Dodo, with a flash of thought in her eyes. The old man gave him a sense of familiarity. Okay. Looking at the old man's trademark bushy white beard, his eyes twinkled, he remembered. This old man seems to be Kosha's father, Dodo, in the hands of the rebel army. Thinking of this, he raised his head, his eyes flashed red. Sure enough, this is Kosha's old lair, and he hasn't moved to Catalia yet. Sensing the countless young and chaotic atmosphere in the town, the red light in Sorata's eyes disappeared, and she lowered her head and smiled at Dodo. "We just came from Aluma." "Love Luma?" Dodo was taken aback for a moment, then looked at Sorata, and asked loudly, "Is Aluma really withered?" "The news is so fast." Sorata stared at Dodo. "Master, how did you know the news so quickly? We just came from Aluma." "We'll wait for the discussion." Dodo waved his hand, stared at Sorata, and asked again, "Is Aluma really dry?" "Advertisement, okay." Without keeping Dodo waiting, Sorata nodded directly and said, "The canal over there is indeed destroyed. If there is no accident, it will become an empty city in a short time. After all, there is no water in the desert. I think it is a god. There is no other way." "God?" Dodo shook his head, looked up at the sunset in the distance, and said, "I am an old man. I don't believe in any gods. I believe in our king. I believe, Alabasta, it will definitely rain." "Okay." Sorata nodded, jumped off the camel, came to Dodo, and said, "Master, I don't believe in God either. Although I have never seen the king of your country, I also believe in him. I believe that he is not like God, as bad as the rebels say. How can he be a bad person if he can be trusted by so many people, especially the elderly? And I believe in this country, it won't be long before it will rain." As he said, he stared into Dodo's eyes, and his eyes must have said again, "Definitely." Dodo raised his head, looked into Sorata's eyes, and was slightly taken aback. He doesn't know who Sorata is, but he can feel the goodwill towards him in this country from Sorata. "Thanks." Dodo bowed and thanked Sorata. For more than a year, Sorata was the first out-islander he had seen who firmly believed in their country and the king of Alabasta. The travelers who passed by here in the past didn't care about this country at all. They just came to Alabasta to play. After hearing the rumors, most of them actually believed in the fact that the king of this country used dancing powder to deprive the country of rainwater. "Okay, sir, it's getting dark when you see it. Why don't you take us to the town to find a place to live?" Sorata reached out to support Dodo, looked at him and said with a smile, "Actually, I just feel that this country will definitely get better based on my feeling, but to really save this country, it depends on you." "Okay, I know." Dodo looked at Sorata with a smile on his old face. He straightened up and said to Sorata, "Guest, although Yuba is also experiencing pain, there are still many houses for guests to live in." As he said that, he turned around and walked towards the town. "Come along, I'll take you to find a place to live." Sorata. Holding the eyelashes, Kuina walked up to Sorata, looked at the potholed ground, and said, "This may be the end of the road." "Okay." Sorata nodded and didn't say much. He led the camel and walked towards Dodo first. "Let's go." Yuba, a hotel in the center of town. Sorata and others will rest here tonight. In fact, the entire Jewish buggy can be said to be empty. Except for the rebel army, the civilians here have already moved to other oases. Therefore, there are many vacant houses here, so that Sorata and the others can live with peace of mind. Dodo brought Sorata's group here, left some water and food, and left. Advertisement at this time, Yuba was not as exhausted as it would be 2 years later, so some water and food were still available. After the meal, everyone went back to the room to rest, and did not go out to hang out and play like Iluma. Because before arriving in Yuba, Firebird introduced the situation here to everyone. Although everyone was not afraid of the rebel army, they still held the attitude that more things are worse than less things, and they didn't go out to play. And at this time Juba is already empty, they just want to play, and there is no place to play, isn't it? In the middle of the night, on the roof of the hotel, a slender figure appeared silently under the moonlight. Sorata sat on the eaves in the middle of the roof, leaning her back against the raised eaves on both sides of the roof. He appeared here simply because he wanted to appreciate the starry sky in the desert, and he didn't want to meet anyone in the past. He has no interest in Koza. That guy is just an overly idealistic and impulsive idiot boy. In front of his eyes, there are actually only what he sees, and what he can't see. In fact, everything in Alabasta is just a conspiracy. Knowing that the canal in Aluma was destroyed by human beings, instead of looking for the destroyers, he would start a rebellion instead. He never thought that even if he really succeeded in rebelling, captured the dancing fans, and really let Alabasta down its reigning. Then, what about the future? It is true that as long as it rains, the rebellion in Alabasta can be stopped at this time, but as long as dancing powder is used, it is likely to attract a more terrifying existence, that is, the world government. The world government has long been unhappy with the Neferutari family of Alabasta. Do you think that the world government really doesn't know that Barlock Studio is clock eaters? You think the world government really doesn't know about K-Lock's plot? Don't be naive. Even the pirate K-Lock Dar can know the news. Can the world government not know the information guarded by the Neferutari clan, which was originally a member of the world government. Although not many people may know, but 5 elders, as well as I am, who really rules the world government, believe they must know. The world government has been refusing to use Alabasta, perhaps just waiting for an excuse and an opportunity. Maybe K-Lok-Dar can know what the Neferutari clan is guarding. It may be the news from the world government to K-Lok-Dar. Otherwise, how could a pirate know such important news? Clang, clang, clang. This old man is really persistent. Sorata raised the wine gourd and looked at the moon in the sky. The red light in her eyes dissipated. Just like Iluma, he doesn't intend to help Dodo. In a few days, the country will return to its original state. Not urgent. Chapter 105. Come on then, Rain Feast. It is built in the middle of the rainy land, on a small island in the middle of the lake. The whole building is divided into 2 parts. The front part is the gambling hall, and there is a bridge outside the main entrance, which directly connects to the street outside. The second half is the exclusive room of K-Lok-Dar. The upper floor is the VIP gaming hall of the casino, and the basement is an extra-large meeting room, which is completely built under the lake. The basement between the conference room and the first half of the casino is connected by an underwater transparent passage. In the surrounding lake water, there are a large number of giant banana crocodiles raised by K-Lok-Dar. Banana crocodile is a beast that feeds on sea kings. It has a banana-like protrusion on its head, and its sharp teeth can easily crush rocks. This kind of beast is Klok-Dar's usual means of punishing his subordinates. Of course, it can also be said to be his pet. In the large conference room at this time, K-Lok-Dar was leaning on a chair, smoking a cigarette, listening to Robin report the gains of the past few days. Ha ha. When he heard the news that Robin was responsible for destroying the Illuma Canal, our Merry Christmas, and our 4 were missing, he stopped smoking. Disappeared? Lok-Dar leaned forward. His back was away from the back of the chair. His hands were propped on the table in front of him, and the cigar in his right hand was passed to his mouth. He opened his mouth, took a cigarette, and took a puff. He looked up at Robin and asked, "When did it happen?" "It should have been last night. The last time they called me was yesterday afternoon. I asked them to stay in Illuma to wait for the next mission. When I contacted again at night, there was no news. By the way, there is one more thing. What's up?" Robin looked at K-Lok-Dar, and she actually hesitated for a long time about what to say next. Although her goal is the historical text guarded by Alabasta, just like K-Lok-Dar, but she doesn't know that K-Lok-Dar can be so crazy for the historical text, crazy enough to subvert a country. In fact, subverting a country is easy to say, but letting this country die in despair, letting this country fall into war, and letting this country be destroyed by its own people, these things make her extremely disgusted. She has wandered in the sea since she was a child, and has experienced countless darkness, although she also knows that she may not be a good person, but her malice is all directed at those greedy and dark people in the pirates, but she has never directed at civilians. So from the very beginning, she hated K-Lok's plan, but she had no choice. Although she and K-Lok were collaborators, she was actually this guy's subordinate. With the huge intelligence network of Barlog Studio, she couldn't leave even if she wanted to. She is not afraid of death, but she cannot die so easily. If she died easily, then her nearly 20 years of fleeing would be a complete joke. Advertisement. She still has to realize her dream. So she can only stay here honestly and continue to help this guy carry out his plan. In fact, this time is an excellent opportunity to get rid of this guy. She didn't know what the silver-haired gang came to Alabasta for. However, judging from the analysis of the silver-haired group in the past news, this group is completely different from ordinary pirates. When they really see the truth of this country, I believe they will definitely conflict with K-Lok. As for which side will win, she is not sure, but she has an intuition in her heart that the silver-hair should win. In her cognition, as one of the 7 warlords of the sea, K-Lok-Dar can be said to be the top powerhouse in this world. She has seen this guy with his natural disaster-like attack, easily destroying a town. In this kingdom full of sand, it can be said that this guy is a god-like existence. As for the silver hair, she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, so she didn't know. But judging from the importance of the world government and marine, it is obvious that the silver hair must be the top in the world, and this guy has also fought against Admiral. She knows the horror of Admiral. I knew it when I was a child. And K-Lok-Dar has never played against Admiral, so in her heart, no matter how strong K-Lok-Dar is, it should not be possible to reach the level of Admiral. Since silver hair can fight against Admiral and leave a wound on Admiral's body, then maybe he can beat Klok-Dar. If that's the case, that silver hair is obviously a more suitable person for her than K-Lok-Dar. I just don't know if silver hair's attitude towards pirates will kill her then. If you don't kill her. Thoughts disappeared from Robin's eyes. She looked at K-Lok-Dar and said calmly, "The silver-haired gang has come to Alabasta." Lok-Dar froze in place as he smoked. Robin doesn't know the gap between him and silver hair. It's because in Robin's knowledge, Aokiji and she met when they were young as the strongest person in the world. Of course she doesn't know. But when he was young, he had been wandering around the new world. Of course, he knew what kind of monsters could fight Admiral, and this guy's reward was 20 times that of his. This is not a simple 20 times. The importance of it is 20 times that of him. Although the bounty does not represent a person's strength, he is still very clear about the fact that every one of the pirates with a bounty of 1 billion is a world-famous big pirate. He is a pirate. Why did he come to Alabasta? Why did he spend so much time planning the historical text of the protection of the royal family of Alabasta? It's not because he clearly knows the gap between him and the top monsters in the world. Otherwise, ghosts would come to play with these weaklings. Now, such a terrible guy came to Alabasta. It's okay if you come to play. If not, you're in trouble. Advertisement. Although he is still very confident in his own strength, especially in this boundless desert. But for the silver hair who can leave a wound on Kizaru, a guy who has never known the upper limit of his strength, he still has a headache. Thinking about the disappearance of our Merry Christmas and R4 that Robin said just now, he put down his hands, stared at Robin, and asked loudly. The disappearance of those two idiots was caused by silver hair. Do not know. The corners of Robin's mouth turned up, and a smile appeared on her face, because she felt a little flustered from K-Lock doll just now. This is an emotion that has never appeared on this guy since she came here. It seems that she doesn't need to guess, judging from this guy's reaction. Although this guy is powerful, he may not be a silver-haired opponent at all. Thinking of this, the smile in her eyes deepened, but after feeling the cold gaze from K-Lock doll, she quickly put away the excess emotions and returned to her usual calmness. Although I don't know if the silver hair did it, but the news from the billions of elders said that not long after they landed in Rapeseed, they rented camels to come to the rainy land. Come to the rainy land. The expression on Clockeater's face became completely gloomy. A fierce light flashed in his eyes, and he opened his mouth and smiled at Robin. It seems that brat really did it. Goo ha 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 ha. Goo, ha 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 ha. To come to the rainy land, there are only two routes. One is to come from Albana, the capital of the country, and the other is to come from Aluma. After the silver-haired guy came to the island, he didn't go to the isle, but came straight to the rainy land. If he didn't come to look for him, I'm afraid he could only lie to the ghost. With that said, K-Lock doll stood up, full of murderous aura. If you want my head, come here. Let me see if you, little brat, are really as powerful as reported in the news. Do you want to call back those who are performing missions outside? Judging from what he knew about Silverhair's personality, from the moment this guy stepped into the land of Alabasta, he knew that he and this guy would have to fight. In this kingdom full of deserts, he has no fear of anyone in this world. Lock doll raised his cigar and took a puff, calling now, the time is too late. Calculated by the speed of the camels riding by the silver-haired group, they should be in Yuba now, and they will be able to reach the rainy land at noon tomorrow at the most. So just call the people from the island over, need not. Then let's fight. At this time, K-Lock Dar has recovered his composure. He stared at Robin, and said indifferently, how many chief conductors are there on the island? Notify the staff of Lock Studio on the island to gather in the rainy place. Since the silver-haired brat is coming to find me, no matter whether he came to fetch my head or not, get ready. Is it an island? Come on then. Robin thought for a while, and replied. On the island at this time, only R1 and his partner ISSFFR, R5 and his partner Isvalente are there, and the others are performing missions outside. And his character determines that he can't make a move to run away before meeting a junior. So, and the place where those two idiots disappeared was Aluma, and the time coincided. Chapter 106 Senior Agents of Bar Lock Studios. The early sun climbed up the sand dunes, and the golden morning light sprinkled over the entire desert. Let this cold desert be shrouded in heat again, Juba. In just one night, it seemed like the whole city was empty. At this time, in addition to some old breath, there are only 3 or 2 kittens left in the city. In fact, last night, while Sorata and the others were sleeping soundly, Kosha led the rebel army and set off for the port city of Rapeseed Flower, next to Catalia. Catalia, the production place of Alabasta's famous perfume, is also a city facing the sea. Although it is not the port city of Alabasta like Rapeseed, it gathers most of the country's population that migrated due to drought. In addition, it is close to the Rapeseed port, so there is no need to worry too much about drought. So after discussing with Kosha and his friends, they unanimously decided to move to Catalia, a city that is especially suitable for their rebel base camp. Early in the morning, Sorata and the others washed up and had a simple meal, then bid farewell to Dodo and headed towards the rainy land. For the empty city behind him, and for Koza, Sorata didn't have much thought. I don't know if that guy Kosha can reach Catalia before the heavy rain comes down. There are so many people, I guess I shouldn't be able to catch up. Maybe these guys will be dismissed by the rain on the way, and I don't know what mood and expression they will have when they arrive. It should be interesting to think about it, but this is not what Sorata cares about. He is lying on the back of the camel at this time, looking at the sun in the sky, thinking about what K-Lock Dar has prepared for his arrival. Hope it's not too boring. They didn't hide their whereabouts when they went to the island. They swaggered all the way, and their goal was very clear, which was the rainy land. In terms of the staff density of Alabasta, Lock Studio must have known that he was coming. After knowing his destination, with that guy's character, it is impossible to run. After all, that guy was 50-50 with Bullet when he was young, and he also challenged Whitebeard's character who didn't die. Advertisement: if he was able to escape without seeing him as a junior, he would not be considered a strong man, nor would he have the ambition to become the Pirate King. In fact, at the running speed of the camels, they should have reached the rainy ground yesterday, but he didn't. On the one hand, I want to appreciate the scenery of the desert, and on the other hand, I want K-Lock to prepare more. He wanted to solve the staff of the Barlock Studio on this island at once. As for those outside the island, that was not his business. After all, they are just some weak people, so it is impossible for him to look for them specially. It is also the luck of these guys that they are not on the island. As for these people on the island, they can only consider themselves unlucky. Rain Feast. Underground hall. This time, instead of 2 people, 4 people sat on the chairs on both sides of the long conference table. There are 1. Daz Bonus, and his partner ISSFFR, Zala. R5, Mr. 5 Inches and his partner Is Valente, Mikita. The 4 of them were the chief conductors and senior agents of the only bar lock studio in Alabasta at this time. At this time, they were all ordered to gather here by a piece of paper, waiting to meet their real boss. I didn't expect that. Mikita, a beautiful woman who looks fashionable on the outside, but she is not soft at all when it comes to killing people. A beautiful girl who always loves to talk with that exaggerated laugh. She is a light lion fruit user, she can change her weight freely, from 1 kilogram to 10,000 kilograms. She looked at the beauty with an afro on the opposite side, opened her mouth and laughed and said, Zala, I didn't expect you to be ISSFFR. Zala, the owner of the Spider-Man coffee shop, Devil Fruit, the ability user of the Thorn Fruit. The whole body can become extremely sharp, can easily pierce the stone wall, and after inserting the spikes into the acupuncture points of the arm, it can become extremely strong. This is a beautiful woman with a hot figure and a dark blue afro. Zala raised the lady's cigarette in his hand, opened his mouth to bite the cigarette holder and took a deep breath, then looked up at Mikita, and said with a smile. I don't remember denying it, I'm not from Barlock Studio. Advertisement at this time, R.5, who was dressed as a rock singer sitting on Mikita's left, said, We all know that you were one of us, but we just didn't expect you to be ISS double father. R5, whose real name is Mr. 5, is a person with the ability to explode the fruit of paramecia. Any part of his body can explode, even the boogers that pop out, and the air blown out of his mouth can also be used as explosives, and he is immune to gunpowder and explosive attacks. Ha ha, Zala chuckled, held up a cigarette, turned his head, and glanced around the meeting room. I don't know what it is that called us here so eagerly. Moreover, his whole body has the physique of a blade, which makes his body, including his internal organs, like real steel, so not only is he invulnerable, but most physical attacks are completely ineffective when hitting his body. Bullets, even ordinary, none of the shells had any effect on him. Daz Bonus looked at Robin, the thin eyebrows, drawn in a straight line. This guy is the strongest person in Barlock Studio other than the president. Before he joined Barlock Studio, he was the famous killer of West Blue, known as Killer Daz Bonus. Only a swordsman who has truly comprehended the artistic conception of cutting iron and can truly cut or penetrate steel can hurt him. After hearing Zala's words, all the people present showed serious expressions on their faces. Just then, there was a chuckle from the giant staircase at the back of the room. So ordinary blunt blows are useless to him at all. Robin waved his hand and said as he walked, The long journey has worked hard for you, thank you all for being here, and coming to this city where everyone wants to get rich overnight by gambling, the dream city, Rainland. Hearing the sound, everyone quickly turned their heads and looked at Robin on the stairs. At this time, R.1, who always had a serious expression and a serious expression, folded his hands on his chest, glanced at Robin, and said, Isle Sunday, what did you call us here for? Not urgent. Because his whole body is covered with blades, his sword skills do not distinguish between the blade and the back of the blade. It seems that everyone came here quite quickly. This is the first time they have been here since they joined the Barlock Studio. As she spoke, she stopped and opened her hands, looked at the crowd and said with a smile, Welcome to the biggest casino, Rain Banquet. The prologue or something, let's stop here, Isle Sunday. He is a blade man who ate paramecia quick slash fruit. He can turn any part of his body into a blade according to his own will, so that ordinary fist attacks have the power of a blade. Isle Sunday. Chapter 107 His ambition is not to stay here, what is Shichibukai? That's right, they are all useless opening remarks. Robin chuckled, glanced at Dazzy Bonus, then turned around and walked towards the chair at the top of the long table that was always facing away from everyone. She walked and said, Before I get down to business, I have to introduce you to the boss of our company who you have never met before. Boss? Everyone's eyes followed Robin, looking at the head of the long table. They have joined Barlock Studio for a long time. Up to now, Robin has been directing their work. They all know that Robin should have a partner, and that partner is the real boss of their company. For this person, they also want to know, who is it? Robin stood next to the chair at the top of the long table, turned around, faced the direction of the long table, glanced at everyone, and said seriously, Although the plan has not really started, our Barlock Studio is facing it as a huge trouble, and this incident may lead to the collapse of our company, so this is why you are called here urgently. Destruction? Everyone was taken aback. At the beginning of the first half of this grand line, is there any force comparable to their Barlock Studio? Marine? Impossible. They shook their heads. Marine is so busy that he doesn't care about their small company. They haven't committed any heinous crimes. Everyone in the company uses code names, and they don't even know the other party's original name. Ghosts, I know that person has been offered a reward. Moreover, their company advertised as a bounty hunter organization, not pirates. Marine can't manage them yet. Robin looked at the astonishment in everyone's eyes and continued, In the past, I was the one who replaced the boss and directed your work, but now that this happened, there is no need to hide in the face of the enemy's attack. Right, said Robin, turned his head to look behind the chair, boss. Well, it's unnecessary, advertisement squeaked. The old wooden swivel chair made a piercing squeaking sound and swiveled from right to left, revealing the figure who had been sitting in the first chair with his back to them. Everyone stared at the tall figure on the chair, all showing expressions of surprise. They are very familiar with this figure. Although they had already guessed it when they came here, after all, the entire Alabasta knew that the casino, rain banquet, was the site of this big man, but when everyone really confirmed their guesses, they still felt very incomparable, shocked. After all, this one is a real, world-class big shot. K-Lock Doll. Daz Bonus, staring at K-Lock Dar, who has always been calm, couldn't help but widen his eyes when he faced K-Lock Dar, a world-class pirate, with tiny beads of sweat protruding from his forehead. Robin turned his head, looked at everyone's reaction, folded his hands on both sides of his body, and said, "It seems that I don't need to introduce more. You should all know his identity to the outside world." "Do you know what you don't know?" Zala stretched out his hand, put the cigarette in his hand into the ashtray on the long table in front of him, then sat up straight, turned to stare at K-Lockadar and said, "Why is the pirate from Shichibukai our boss?" "Ha ha 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 ha, there really is a big shot." Mikita opened her mouth and laughed. Mr. Five tucked his nose, looked at K-Lockadar and said, "So we have always been subordinates of pirates. This is really interesting." Daz Bonus also asked, "So you are our boss?" Although they were prepared when they came here, they called Lock Studios, after all, they declared that they were a bounty hunter organization. Although they kill and set fire and sell information. Although they just want to make money, they do everything. But most of them didn't offer a reward at all. At this time, seeing the company's boss, who turned out to be a pirate, it's not hard to understand why they were so surprised. Pirates are one thing. Advertisement for a big man like Shichibukai, that's even more of a problem. Lock Doll took out the cigar from his pocket, put it in his mouth, then took out the lighter to light the cigarette, watching the reaction of everyone quietly through the shreds of tobacco floating from the corner of his mouth. He had expected everyone's reaction, so he was not surprised. After all, he is a pirate licensed by the world government and has legal plundering qualifications. It seems completely useless for someone like him to deliberately set up a criminal group company. But what they don't know is that he established this company not for money or status, but for military power. Alabasta is the country of 20 kings who founded the world government. Although there are no strong men here, it is not a matter of trying to seize this country, the royal family of this country, and the historical text guarded by the Neferutari clan. Simple thing. Although he has power, he can't attack the Neferutali family without any scruples, because that will attract marine and further the power of world government. He doesn't want to lose his Shichibukai identity yet. So he can only hide in the dark and plan slowly. When the country is really destroyed and the Neferutali family is no longer a royal family, then he can take action against the Neferutari family without any scruples. That's why he founded the Bar Lock Studio, supported the rebel army, used dancing powder in Albania, and drove the country into despair. Because only if the civilians of Alabasta are completely disappointed with their king and completely desperate, can they follow his will and truly drive the Neferutali family down from the status of the royal family, and he can truly have no scruples. Go find the historical text. Another reason is because the king of this country, Nafirutali Cobra, is a good king who loves the people, but he is not a king who is afraid of death. Using conventional methods, he definitely couldn't force Cobra to tell where the historical texts guarded by his family were. Therefore, only some unconventional means can be used. Who told Cobra to be a good king who loved his people? If Cobra was really a king who was greedy for life and afraid of death, it would actually be much simpler for him, and he wouldn't have to plan secretly for so long, and even establish a special power. Because when he really finds what he wants, he doesn't care about Shichibukai, marine, or world government. His ambition is not to stay here. What kind of Shichibukai? His ambition has not changed from the beginning to the end. That is to take the head of the strongest man in the world, Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, and become Pirate King. Chapter 108 Meeting Ceremony. Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell. The midday sun shines on the boundless desert. This hot weather is like an oven that is switched on, and Sorata and his team are the barbecue that is about to be cooked in the oven. Ah, this damn weather, it's too hot. Aluo shrugged his head, stuck out his tongue, and lay limply on the back of the camel. The excitement in the morning had long since disappeared. On his left and right sides, a Wa and a Dao, like this guy, are like a salted fish that has just been salvaged ashore and hung to dry. I heard that Alabasta's dream city, Rainland, is in front of it. It is the only city not affected by the drought. It must be very prosperous. A Dao straightened up, stretched out her hand, wiped off the sweat on her forehead with her sleeve, then took out the cigarette case from her bosom, took out a cigarette, and put it in her mouth. Then he put down the cigarette case and took out the lighter. Crack, the flames rose. He lowered his head, put the cigarette butt on the flame, and took a deep breath. Zzz. When the shredded tobacco meets the fire, a bright flame bursts out, and the smoke is ignited in a burst of swelling sound. Ding! A Dao closed the lid of the lighter, put the lighter in his pocket, then took a deep breath of the cigarette, stretched out his right hand, put the cigarette between the index finger and middle finger, put down his hand, looked up at the Firebird in front of the right, and exhaled a cigarette circle, asked. Firebird, how long will it take to reach the rainy land? It's not far away, it's not far away. Huonayo turned his head and smiled at a Dao. Brother Dao, the weather in this desert is really uncomfortable. We also stayed for a long time before we got used to it, ha ha. As long as you get to the rainy land, you can have a good rest. It is the most prosperous place in the inland city of Alabasta, except for the capital Albana. Oh, Adao raised her hand, took a puff of a cigarette, turned her head to look at the yellow sand dunes in the distance, and said, "Tell me, how prosperous is it?" "How prosperous?" Firebird stroked his chin, pondered for a moment, and then said, "There is the largest inland lake in Alabasta, and in the center of that inland lake, there is a rain banquet, the largest casino in the entire kingdom." "What fun is there in a casino?" Adao waved his hand, not interested in casinos. He turned his head to look at Firebird, and then asked, "Apart from casinos? Is there anything else interesting?" "Advertisement, Firebird hesitated for a moment, and then said, "It seems that there is nothing interesting except for the casino. After all, this country is just a country in the desert. There must be no other country or island that is as colorful as other islands that can have such a big casino. Was also established after Shichibukai and K-Lock Doll came. Yudi didn't have such a big casino in the first place." Oh, Adao didn't have much interest in the biggest casino. At this moment, all the people on the camel straightened up and looked forward. Sandstorm? Firebird looked at the road in the distance. No, it was a few huge orange-yellow sand pillars that went straight to the sky, and quickly looked back, facing the front of the camel caravan, and shouted loudly, "Brother Silverhair, sandstorm, sandstorm." He wouldn't be so nervous about ordinary sandstorms, but the few sandstorms advancing towards them in the distance were obviously not small. From a long distance, he could feel a gust of wind constantly coming towards them. The few whirlwinds connecting the sky and the earth rolled up boundless sand and dust, covering everything in front of them. The orange-yellow dust, like an endless wall, was rapidly advancing towards them. A meeting ceremony? Sandstorms of this magnitude are terrifying? Sorata straightened up, looked at the sandstorm in the distance, raised the wine gourd, and took a big sip. "Although I have known for a long time that Lock Doll can't be as useless as in the anime, but to be able to achieve this level is worthy of being able to fight Bullet 50-50 and challenge Whitebeard's man when he was young. Although this guy may not have awakened Haki, but with this level of fruit development, I believe that the General Vice Admiral should not be this guy's opponent at all. I just don't know if this guy is really restrained by water. Can't this guy's sand absorb water? How could he be hit by Luffy's water-covered fist? Can't figure it out. If you can't figure it out, don't think about it. Just try it with water when you meet." Sorata put down the wine gourd, turned around, and shouted to the people behind him, "Everyone gather around me, don't run around." "It is good." Everyone answered, shook the reins, and quickly gathered around Sorata. Space field. Sorata thought silently in his heart, countless layers of transparent space, with him as the center, spread to the surroundings, forming a transparent space cover with a diameter of 40 meters around him. As his age increases, the scope and number of layers he controls the spatial domain also increases. Woo 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 woo. Everyone looked at the sandstorm that was swiftly sweeping towards them, and subconsciously closed their eyes. Advertisement. After waiting for a while, the expected strong wind and dust did not come. They opened their eyes and looked at the sky in shock. The wind was still blowing, but when they got close, it was as if they had encountered something, blocked in front of them by a layer of transparent space, and the oncoming storm was divided into two halves by the space, sliding from both sides of them, past. And they are in the space domain, but they can't feel the wind at all. Amazing. Huo Niao's two little brothers looked at the yellow sand blowing in the sky with shock on their faces. It was the first time they saw Sorata's ability. They knew that Sorata was powerful before, but they didn't expect it to be so powerful. This is a natural disaster. It was so easily blocked from the outside. It's so strong. What are you looking at? Firebird turned back, looked at the two younger brothers who were standing still, and yelled loudly. Don't leave yet. Do you want to go out and feel the sandstorm outside? What? And this time? Seeing the reactions of the two younger brothers, Firebird shook his head. He withdrew his gaze, looked around, and was blocked by the wind and sand outside the domain, with a flash of excitement in his eyes. In fact, Sorata's domain increased with his age. Although the domain expanded, his control over the domain at this time could not truly freeze Admiral. Although Admiral cannot be frozen, it is more than enough to freeze a powerhouse of Vice Admiral's level. Double, that is to say, the volume has increased by 8 times. The two younger brothers came back to their senses, shook the reins quickly, and quickly followed the crowd. And these people can't even resist. Therefore, even if Sorata's current strength does not rely on his sword skills or teleportation, his domain alone is enough for him to squeeze into the group of the most powerful people in the world. It's terrible, in this sea, except for a few peak powerhouses, ordinary powerhouses, in his domain, or fish on the chopping board and ants crawling on the ground, and he can do whatever he wants. He visually inspected it, and the diameter was twice as large as last time. The stronger Sorata is, the more valuable the news he shoots, and his status in their newspaper will be higher. He withdrew his gaze and looked at Sorata's back. The excitement in his eyes grew stronger. Although he had seen Sorata's space domain last time on Ore Island, and felt the magic of Sorata's space domain, the domain he saw now was obviously stronger. He remembered that the field last time was not so big. Seeing that Sorata's strength has increased so much at this time, can he not be excited? Listening to the wind whistling outside, they looked at the figure on the leading camel, and the awe in their eyes grew even stronger. Chapter 109. The Young, Impulsive Princess. Rainy Land. In the direction of Yuba, there are people standing outside the city, all of whom were summoned by Robin the night before. They are all the members of the Bar Lock Studio in Alabasta at this time. Among these people, most of them are ordinary looking, and only a few are tall and fierce. Most of them are ordinary people, but they are more fierce than ordinary people, and they know how to use weapons better. At this moment, they all stared excitedly at the dunes outside, at the figures standing on the dunes, especially the tall figure smoking a cigar. They would never have imagined that the boss of their company is actually Shichibukai. After knowing that their boss is K-Lock Doll, they are not worried, but are full of excitement about the company and the future. They don't care if the boss is a pirate or not, they only know that their head is a strong man, a world-renowned strong man, and a pirate specially approved by the world government to plunder and not break the law. This is enough. Among the crowd, a girl with a high ponytail, aqua blue hair, and a gray robe was staring at the back of K-Lock Doll in the distance with disbelief. The girl is the princess of Alabasta, Nefeltari Vivi. Since she just joined the bar lock studio not long ago, she is still in Alabasta in front of the little guy in the bar lock studio. Next to Vivi, stood a tall man who was also covered in a gray robe and had strange curly hair. The man is Alabasta's guard captain, Ikaram. In order to protect Princess Vivi and explore the secrets of the Barlock Agency, he sneaked into the Barlock Agency with Princess Vivi and became an undercover agent. Ikalem also stared at K-Lockadar in disbelief. Their main purpose of coming to Barlock Studio is to find out the relationship between Barlock Studio and dancing fans, but they never expected that the final boss of Barlock Studio is actually known as a hero in Alabasta, Seven Warlords Clock Dar, one of the sea. While enjoying the praise and admiration of the common people, this guy is pushing the country to its demise. This guy fooled this country like this, and fooled countless citizens of this country who trusted him. Filling Vivi and Ikaram's hearts with rage. Clock Doll, Gramlock Doll, Gramlock Doll. Vivi stared at K-Lock Doll, trembling all over, her eyes were bloodshot, she kept calling K-Lock Doll's name, her voice was full of anger. Vivi. Ikaram came back to his senses, turned his head to look at Vivi, he sensed something was wrong, and quickly wanted to reach out and grab Vivi. Advertisement, but he noticed it too late and didn't move fast enough, so he didn't catch Vivi. The moment Vivi turned his head in Ikaram, he pushed aside the crowd in front and rushed towards K-Lockadar. K-Lock Doll. Vivi's angry voice covered up the surrounding whispers and resounded throughout the world. Oops, Ikaram withdrew his hand and quickly chased after Vivi, his eyes were full of worry. He is several decades old, but he is not as innocent and impulsive as Vivi, a teenage girl. It was a joyful thing to meet the mastermind behind the Barlock studio today. But Vivi couldn't bear the anger in her heart and rushed out, which made the originally happy event turn into a tragedy. What? Clockadar heard the movement, turned around, and calmly looked at Vivi who was rushing towards him. He smoked and stared at Vivi's face with a thoughtful look on his face. Madness. Robin also turned around. When she saw Vivi's face, she was slightly taken aback, and there was only one sentence in her mind at this moment. How stupid. In fact, at Vivi's age, he has been living in a peaceful Alabasta. At this time, when he meets someone who wants to destroy Alabasta, it is understandable to make an impulsive and irrational decision. But how excusable it is, it's also stupid. She was so stupid that she wanted to fight K-Lock Doll over her own strength. She was too stupid to see the situation clearly, let alone the gap between her and K-Lock Doll. She never thought that the price of her impulse might be her life, and of course there was Ikaram who was following her, and behind Ikaram, a bird that had been hiding in the life of a duck in a gray robe. Robin came back to his senses, glanced at Clock Doll who was thinking, pursed his lips, and shook his head. If you do your own crimes, you can't live. Since K-Lock Doll wants to seize this country, how could he not know the real masters of this country? In fact, not long after Vivi and Ikaram joined Barlock Studio, she knew about Vivi and their existence. Advertisement. If she hadn't blocked Vivi and Ikaram's news, Clock Doll would have known. Do you really think the crime syndicate, Barlock Studios, can sneak in anyone and go undercover? Even if ordinary agents don't know Vivi, it's impossible that no one in the entire Barlock Studio knows it. It was she who secretly got rid of all the senders, and changed the files of Vivi and Ikaram, which allowed them to mix safely in the Barlock Studio until now. Well, Lock Doll, watching Vivi approaching gradually, finally remembered who Vivi was. He had seen this girl more than once, how could he forget? It is hidden in the sleeves on weekdays for easy use at any time. The feathers on the weapon are the feathers extracted from the most precious peacock, which can be arbitrarily lengthened to form different moves, and the feathers can be regenerated. Wei Wei stared at K-Lock Doll, a gleam of joy flashed across his face. Goo, ha 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 ha, successful. Isn't this our Princess Vivi? You are not staying in the palace, what are you doing here? Clock Dar. No, not a hint of bloodline, nor any sense of cutting. Puff, the two spinning peacock feathers, like gears, quickly cut through K-Lock Doll's neck, causing K-Lock Doll's neck to be cut off instantly, and his head hovered in the air. Peacock Chain saw. She put her hands on both sides, and the peacock chain kept spinning. When she got close to K-Lock, she crossed her hands to the sides, then waved her hands to the middle, and chopped at K-Lock's neck. If K-Lockadar was defeated by a little girl like this, he would not be eligible to be 7 warlords of the sea, nor would he be eligible to be their boss. This is her weapon, Peacock Chain, a motorized knife controlled by a thin thread tied to the ring of the little finger, shaped like a peacock's tail feathers. With her eyes fixed on K-Lock Dale, she pulled out 2 rings from her sleeves as she ran, and put them on the little fingers of both hands. When Vivi was about to get close to Lock, she tore off the robe on her body, revealing the dark green jacket and t-shirt inside, and the shorts she was wearing on her lower body. Before she was happy for too long, she felt that something was wrong, and the joy on her face disappeared immediately. The senior agents around didn't move. They stared at Vivi with the corners of their mouths slightly upturned, their faces full of sarcasm. Chapter 110 Regret. Do you want to die that much? Lock Doll's broken neck is recovering quickly with a burst of sand filling. He stared at Vivi, and said calmly, I didn't expect that there is a smart person in this country. How did you sneak into Barlock's studio? As he spoke, his eyes drifted to Robin, who was on the side. The people below don't know Vivi, but Robin must. Robin withdrew his gaze from Vivi, turned his head to stare at K-Lock Doll, shrugged calmly, Don't look at me, I don't know either. Useless woman. Puff, before K-Lock Doll could continue to speak, two cross-rotating peacock feathers quickly cut from both sides of K-Lock Doll's head and along his mouth, making his next words rot in his stomach. Peacock Shane saw reverse current. Vivi stood in front of K-Lock Doll, opened his hands, let it go. The peacock chain locks hanging on the tail fingers of both hands lost their rotation force, stopped slowly, and drooped and retracted into his hands. She stared at the slow healing of Locke's severed head, her eyes filled with anger and horror. Totally useless. It is impossible for her not to know what such an ability is. Logia Devil Fruit. Goo. Ha 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 ha. Lock Doll recovered, looked down at Vivi, who was nearly half the height in front of him, blinked his mouth, took a deep breath of the cigar in his mouth, and then let the shreds of tobacco slowly drift out along the corners of his mouth. I don't know what Logia Devil Fruit is. Clothes can be elementalized, not to mention, even the smoke in the mouth is also elementalized. Really NB. You should be very clear about my fruit ability. K. Lockadar stared at Vivi and said with a smile, In this endless desert, I am a god, you. As he spoke, he frowned slightly, and the smile on his face disappeared. I'm a pirate of a completely different level from ordinary pirates. Knowing the gap between me, I dare to rush out. Huh, he stretched out his hand to hold the cigar, opened it and took a puff of smoke, then put the cigar in his mouth, and said to Vivi. I don't know what you think, do you just want to die like that? Do you still think I'm really hero of Alabasta, just naively think that I really won't kill you? As he spoke, his body leaned forward, his face was gloomy, and his tall body blocked the sunlight, completely covering Vivi's body in his shadow. Advertisement, Nai, Fei, Lu, Ta, Li Vivi. He stared at Vivi and called out Vivi's full name word by word. The infinite sense of oppression instantly pressed on Vivi's thin body, causing Vivi to freeze in place. She looked at K-Lock Doll and wanted to move, but her mind was clear, but her body didn't obey her control and she couldn't move at all. Princess Vivi. Ikaram, who arrived at the last step, saw that Vivi was in danger, so he didn't care so much. He tore off the gray robe on his body, revealing his unique big curly hair. He ran to the right, with a few gun barrels out of his big curls, avoiding Vivi who was standing in front of Clockadar. Clap 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 clap. Amidst the flickering fire, countless bullets shining with metallic luster quickly shot towards K-Lockadar. Go to hell. And the duck following Ikaram rushed straight towards Vivi, and it wanted to take its owner Vivi out of here before K-Lock Doll could react. Just when Ikaram's bullet pierced Clockeater's body, the duck had rushed to Vivi's back. It pushed its head upwards, pushing away the robe covering its head, and there was a loud bang against Vivi's back. Roar. Gaw. It is a duck with human nature. Its common name is Run Fast, but its real name is Karoo. Its herd is the fastest animal in Alabasta, a cavalry troop of the kingdom, and it is the exclusive mount of Alabasta Princess Nefeltari Vivi. Seeing that its master is in danger, even if it knows that Lock Dar is an invincible opponent, it has to keep up with its master, because its master, Princess Vivi, is not only its master, but also it can never give up. Partner. Karoo. Karoo's cry recalled Vivi's mind that was oppressed by K-Lock Doll. She glanced at K-Lock Doll, turned around quickly, stared at Kaloo, with a flash of self-blame on her face. She is now fully conscious. After waking up, there was deep self-blame and regret, and her impulsiveness exposed their identities that they had finally entered the Lock Studio undercover. She hasn't passed the news back to the palace that the boss of Lock Studio is K-Lock Dar. The price of this impulsiveness may cause her to be buried here, and it will also implicate Karu and Ekalem. She looked up at the countless people at Barlocky's studio around her, filled with desperation. Can you run away? Gaw. Advertisement. Seeing that Vivi was standing there, Karu couldn't help but shouted anxiously. There is no time to hesitate. Vivi withdrew her gaze, suppressed the despair in her heart, patted her face, put her hands on Karu's back, jumped up, and quickly stepped onto Karu's back. Ikaram. Vivi bent down and hugged Karu's neck, turned to stare at Ikaram and shouted, Go. Walk. Ikaram turned his head to stare at Vivi, with the corners of his mouth upturned, showing a smile. Princess Vivi, you must return to Albana safely, Karu. Gaw. Gaw. Go. It must have given away its owner, Vivi. Karu took one last look at Ikaram, turned around, and stared firmly in the direction of the gap left between Barlock's studio and several senior agents. Gaw. Vivi stared at Ikaram's back, tears welling up, pupils full of guilt. Ikaram. Now is the time for her to pay the bill. Not to mention him and Wei Wei, even the entire kingdom and the entire king's army have come. There is nothing they can do about this guy. She knew that Ikaram stayed to buy time for her and Karu to escape, and she knew what would happen to Ikaram if he stayed, but she was helpless. People always have to pay for their impulses. As the captain of the Alabasta Guard, no one in this kingdom knows the horror of Kalok-Dar better than him. As Kalok-Dar said before, this guy is really a godlike existence in the desert. Karu looked at Ikaram, stretched out his wings, and saluted a military. As he spoke, he looked down and stared at Karu. Karu, take Princess Vivi back safely, this is an order. Clap 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 clap. The moment he rushed out of the crowd, he knew the ending. Ikaram yelled, and finally smiled at Vivi, turned his head, opened his legs, and walked towards Kalok-Dar. The machine gun in his hair kept shooting at Kalok-Dar. Even if. Risk your life. Chapter 111 The Weak, Goo, ha 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 ha. A gust of wind blew. Kalok-Dar did not know when he stood behind Ikalim. He stared at Karu who was running in the distance, and said with a smile, sometimes I really admire the loyalty of people like you. Ha ha ha. The laughter was full of sarcasm and teasing. Huh, he stopped laughing, turned his head and glanced at Robin. His eyes were indifferent, and murderous intent emerged. With so many of his subordinates here, and Vivi can get away, that would be a ghost. The killing intent in Locke's eyes made Robin's heart skip a beat. She knew that Kalok-Dar suspected her, but she was not afraid at all, because before seeing that thing, even if she did anything, as long as it didn't really touch Kalok-Dar's bottom line, Kalok-Dar would not be able to what about her. After all, what the whole world knows, only she can understand what is written on that thing. She turned her head and looked at Vivi. It was obvious that if Vivi was allowed to escape, it would be Kalok's bottom line. If she didn't do it, Kalok could kill her now. No way. Good luck, my stupid princess. Robin crossed his hands in front of him, and looked at Karu who was under Vivi. 6 wheels twist roll. While the petals were flying, 6 hands suddenly grew out of Kalu in the distance, and they grabbed Laboon's feet, wings and neck respectively. In a burst of click, Kalu's feet were suddenly mixed together, and he fell to the ground with a bump. Under inertia, the body draws a long gully forward. Seeing Karu and Vivi lying in the dust, Robin let go of his hand, and the arms on Karu's body disappeared immediately as the petals flew. She is a paramecia, flower fruit, ability user, which can make any part of the body grow arms like flowers. Arms can also be attached to anything tangible within her line of sight, and used for attack or other purposes. Cough. Cough cough. Vivi got up from the sand and quickly looked at Karu next to her. Seeing Karu who fell to the ground, she quickly crawled over, knelt on the ground, grabbed Karu's wings with both hands, and shouted loudly, Karu, Karu, are you okay? Hearing Vivi's cry, Karu wanted to turn his neck to look at Vivi, but it couldn't do it. His feet, wings and neck were completely dislocated in front of Robin's joint technique just now. Let alone move now, just move can't do it. Its head lay on the ground, staring at Robin in the distance. If eyes could kill, then Robin would probably be killed dozens of times by Karu's eyes. Advertisement, gaw. It was this woman who ruined their way of life, making it impossible for them to escape now. Karu, Princess Vivi. Ikaram ignored Kalok-Dar behind him. He looked anxiously at Vivi and Karu, and his pupils were full of despair. He knew that if there were no miracles, they would all die here today. It's all now, you should think about yourself, Goo, ha 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 ha. Kalok-Dar withdrew his gaze from Vivi, and focused his gaze on Ikaram again. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Ikaram's shoulder. Poor weakling. You can't even beg for mercy now. With that said, he activated his ability, Desert Prison. Ikaram's painful voice attracted the attention of everyone around here. Ikaram's body gradually shriveled under the gazes of many terrified, horrified, or excited eyes. In the end, the whole person, as if being completely sucked dry, became a body like a mummy. Dried up. Mikita held up her umbrella and stared at Ikaram who was being held by Kalok-Dar. The exaggerated smile on her face disappeared. Gudu, she swallowed, and stared at Kalok-Dar with awe for the first time. The other 3 senior agents beside her looked at Kalok-Dar with the same awe in their eyes. They didn't know much about Kalok-Dar before, but now, they finally do. Just this hand. They can't understand this move that can completely suck people dry, and of course, they can't resist. Kalok-Dar expected the reactions of those around him. But he totally ignored it. Advertisement among these subordinates, except for Robin who was useful to him, the rest are all dispensable roles. If it wasn't for the sudden arrival of the silver-haired gang this time, he wouldn't have let these guys come. If the goal of the silver-haired gang coming here is really him, then these guys coming here are the cannon fodder he prepared for the silver-haired gang. Although cannon fodder can't defeat the enemy, it can disperse the enemy. You must know that the silver-haired group is not the only strong one in the silver-haired group, but there is also a great swordsman, Blue Hair, in their group with a reward of 250 million. There is even a reward of 500 million, and some chef, Wallace Hanajiro, who has no idea where it came from. And this guy offered a reward of 500 million for the first time. From this, we can know the degree of threat that Hanajiro is in the world government. He is an old pirate, although he knows that the level of the bounty does not represent the strength of a pirate, but the first bounty was offered, and the bounty was given at a sky-high price of 500 million. As long as he is not a fool, he should know that Hanajiro must be taken seriously. You know, even the silver-haired guy's first reward was only 70 million. Ikaram, who landed on the ground, stared wide-eyed. He turned sideways, his whole body curled up into a ball, His hands kept grabbing his throat, and he kept coughing, but he couldn't cough up any trace of water. It's not when he first went to sea. At that time, he didn't know the heights of the sky and the depths of the earth. He dared to challenge anyone. He was never afraid of facing the strongest in the world. As for other, that's why K-Lock Doll is so nervous about the arrival of the silver-haired gang, and is so motivating. Cough 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 cough, he only has the strong in his eyes. His whole body, all the organs in his body, were screaming and giving out signs of desperate water, but no one here could give him water. For example, the world's strongest Whitebeard who defeated him, such as Bullet who once had a 50-50 split with him. Although self-confidence is still there, but there are better ways, why go reckless? Lock Dar took a puff of his cigarette, stared at Ikaram indifferently, let go of his hand, and let Ikaram's shriveled body drift with the wind, and finally fell to the ground like a piece of paper. Otherwise, if the car overturns, there is no place to cry, is there? The weak. These two are the strong men that he agrees with very much. Although he has the confidence to face anyone in this boundless desert, it is better to be cautious. Either they had never played against each other, or they had no chance to fight at all, so he didn't know. But now, at the age of 42, he has already passed the impulsive age. Weak people don't even have the qualifications for him to face up to them. Lock Dar reached out to hold his cigar, and blew out a smoke ring at Ikaram, ignoring Ikaram. Chapter 112 Despair. Ikaram. Vivi looked at Ikaram, at his shriveled body that kept struggling, and at his expression of extreme pain. The fountain of tears finally couldn't help opening, and the tears kept breaking through the eyelids like a flood that burst a bank. The dikes flowed quickly across her cheeks, pooled under her chin, and then fell like raindrops. Constantly, it dripped non-stop, dripping in this dry desert. Vivi's expression was full of despair, just like this desert of despair, just like this desperate country. She now regrets the impulse just now. Looking at the despair and regret in Vivi's eyes, Clock Doll laughed. Hey, ha 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 ha, my highness, where's the courage to wave a weapon at me just now? As soon as he said that, he stopped laughing, raised his feet, and walked slowly towards Vivi. He said as he walked, the weak must have the consciousness of the weak. Although I appreciate your courage, you must be prepared to bear my anger after waving your weapon. Although I don't hate you impulsive young brats, but what? As he spoke, he took a puff of a cigarette and stood in front of Vivi. The shadow completely blocked Vivi. He lowered his head, took a puff of smoke, and stared at Vivi oppressively. However, I really hate the kid who can't figure out where he is. K-Lock Doll. Vivi raised her head and met Lock's indifferent gaze without any fear. Her eyes were full of anger and hatred. Clock Dar, although we may die here today, I believe that one day, you will also pay for what you have done. She is now well aware of the gap between her and K-Lock Doll, but so what, knowing that the gap is waiting to die in place. This is clearly not her character. She turned her head and glanced at Karu, her eyes filled with apology. It was her impulsiveness that caused Karu and Ikaram to die with her. She knew that unless there was a miracle, unless there was a god, no one would be able to save them today. Gaw. Gaw. Quack quack. Karu shook his head, turned to look at Vivi. His eyes were full of anxiety. He saw determination and even death in Vivi's eyes. Although it is a duck with human nature. Now seeing that its master, who has been with him since he was a child, is going to die, but it can do nothing, this fills his heart with anxiety. Advertisement. It hates its own weakness so much that it can be subdued with one move, otherwise they should have escaped by now. Vivi took one last look at Karu, reached out to wipe away her tears, and then stood up slowly. She turned around, looked up at K-Lock Doll, said nothing, pulled out the peacock chain from the sleeve, and put it on the little fingers of both hands. Then put both hands on both sides, and when the hands were shaken, the peacock chain immediately spun. Oh, Lock Doll stared at Vivi, his expression darkened instantly. I want to die early. Vivi didn't reply to Lock Doll's words. She kicked her feet on the sand, her body leaned forward instantly, and then threw her hands forward. The peacock spreads its tail. Lock didn't pay any attention to the two spinning peacock feathers that were shot rapidly. Puff. With a gloomy face, he stretched out his hand and grabbed Vivi, letting the spinning peacock feathers cut through his body. Gaw. Karu watched as Lock Doll kept approaching Vivi's hand, and his body kept struggling, but it was useless. The more he struggled, the more painful and numb the joint that was dislocated by Robin before, until finally he couldn't move at all. Up. Gaw. It turned its pupils, stared at Vivi's back, and let out a desperate cry. It's really touching the love between master and servant. Lock Doll's body was cut open by the peacock chain thrown by Vivi, and he recovered quickly. He glanced at Karu behind Vivi, and there was a hint of teasing in his eyes. His outstretched hand reached in front of Vivi, and then it was like a pliers, instantly stuck on Vivi's neck. No matter how deep the relationship is, you can only watch your master die. This is the sorrow of the weak. As he spoke, Clockadar lifted his arm vigorously, lifting Vivi's entire body. He turned his head, turned his eyes to Vivi, and met Vivi's eyes full of stubbornness and hatred. Lock Doll took a puff of his cigarette and exhaled. The shreds of tobacco drifted out along the corner of his mouth. Aren't you reconciled? Not reconciled, that's something that can't be helped. Lock Doll retracted his arm and brought Vivi closer to him. His pupils full of indifference stared at Vivi's eyes, and said teasingly, yes, I was the one who caused the drought in Alabasta, and I was the one who used the dancing powder in Albasta, and I also secretly supported the rebel army. It won't be long before the people of this country will join the rebel army in complete despair, and then in the trap I set up in advance, they will have a thorough fight with the king's army of the kingdom. Do you know what this is? Advertisement, lock, doll. Vivi's face was flushed, her whole body was trembling with excitement, her eyes were bloodshot, as if she was about to spew fire angrily. She stared at K-Lock doll, gritted her teeth and shouted, "Are you still human? How could you treat so cruelly countless citizens of this country who regard you as a hero?" Hero? Hey, ha 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 ha, hero. K-Lock doll looked up and laughed crazily as if he had heard something very funny. Hero? Do you know how this hero came from? Why every time a pirate comes, I just arrive right there, haven't you thought about it? Ha ha ha. He looked down at Vivi with sarcasm in his eyes. The voice was like a ghost, full of coldness. Goo, ha 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 ha. This look of Vivi made K-Lock doll's expression even more joyful. A chuckle followed the bell. Jingle bell. The voice was very soft, but it reached everyone's ears clearly. Vivi is now so angry that she can't say anything else at all. She stares at K-Lock doll, and in her blood-red pupils, there is monstrous hatred. Clock doll, Gram-Lock doll, Gram-Lock doll. However, at this moment, a crisp bell sounded from the distant desert. It's so cute and stupid, isn't it perfect? Goo, ha 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 ha. Jingle bell. Ha ha. Yo. Is this K-Lock, one of the Shichibukai? You really deserve to bully a little girl like this? As he said that, he was ready to activate his ability and let Vivi die. Also, let me tell you a secret, I will continue to use dancing powder in Albali. I will make the people of this country completely break with the king of this country and your good father, and then fight between the rebel army and the king's army. In order to completely destroy this country and make this country my utopia, this is my plan. Her lips twitched, calling Locke's name over and over again. The corners of his mouth turned up, and he laughed loudly. I like the look in your eyes, I like the look in your eyes that hate me so much, and you have nothing to do with me. Don't worry, I will send your father and most people in this country down soon to accompany you. Let you be your princess in the underworld, ha ha ha. Jingle bell. Chapter 113 Human. Always have to suffer a little in order to have a long memory. Who? Everyone in Barlock's studio turned their heads and looked at the depths of the golden desert in the distance. Come yet. Robin and Locke's heart tightened. There are only the two of them here, knowing why so many people are called here today. Compared with Locke doll's instantly serious expression, Robin is much more relaxed. Because the silver-haired gang came at the right time, if it was later, that stupid princess would really die. She could see that Clock doll was already ready to kill. And she believed that as long as K-Lock doll passed the level of silver-hair today, then K-Lock doll would not let anyone who was present today except herself. Lock doll will not allow any flaws in his plan before actually starting to plan. If there are no flaws, of course, the less people know the better, but if you want the fewer people to know, of course only let those who know completely shut up. As for herself, she had nothing to fear. K-Lock doll will not kill her at this time. As for Silverhair, she is not afraid of death, but it is worthless not to want to die. If Silverhair really wanted to kill her, just like K-Lock doll wanted to kill her, she had no room for resistance. So, her mood at this time is relatively relaxed. At least, it's much better than watching that silly girl die. Jingle bell. The ringtone, from far to near, gradually became clearer. Everyone is staring nervously at the sand dunes in the distance. Everyone is an adult, and no one is a fool. Although they didn't know why they were summoned here today, looking at K-Lock, who was still extremely rampant before, now looked serious. They should know that the voice that came with the bell earlier should be the person they're going to face today. Vivi also heard the voice, and she looked at K-Lock's rapidly changing face, and a gleam of hope for life flashed in her eyes. No one wants to die, and she is no exception. She has to go back to the palace to reveal the true face of K-Lock herself. Boom, with a wave of his arm, Clockdale tossed Vivi aside like trash. For Vivi's small matter, it is now irrelevant. Facing the coming Silverhair, he did not dare to take it lightly. Suck backquote call backquote. Advertisement. Vivi took a few breaths. She almost died just now. She saw the real death in K-Lock's eyes. Now without Lock doll's pincer-like hands choking her neck, she felt that the whole world was brighter. She has never felt the greatness of life like this moment. It turns out that being alive is such a beautiful thing. Vivi just panted for a while, put her hands on her knees, and stood up quickly. She turned her head, looked at Karu who was lying on the side, and hurried over anxiously. Karu, are you alright? Gah, full of spirit. It's fine, I'll go to the doctor later, you bear with it first. Vivi squatted down and stroked Karu's head, then turned her head and looked at the sand dunes in the distance. The person who can make K-Lock doll take it so seriously must be a big person. At least it should be at the same level as K-Lock doll. She hoped that someone would come, preferably K-Lock's enemy, preferably defeat K-Lock, or even kill K-Lock. She has always been kind, and she has never hated someone so much. She wished that K-Lock doll would die immediately. Oh no. When I saw a line of camels walking up the sand dunes in the distance. When he saw the silver-haired figure on the front camel. Everyone in Barlock's studio subconsciously took a step back. They stared at Sorata's recognizable pair of blue pupils, and the cold sweat on their foreheads couldn't stop breaking out. Goo goo. The sound of swallowing saliva resounded. It's not that they are useless, it's that the pressure from the other party is too strong. Although Sorata didn't lose any momentum, the 1.5 billion sky-high reward was the best momentum. No one is so foolish as to think that the pirates offering a bounty of 1.5 billion will be something they youngsters can face. Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell. The camel came from far and near, and in a short while came to the position where the senior agent of the Barlock studio was standing. As for the 4 senior agents, they retreated to K. Lockadar as soon as they saw Sorata. Advertisement don't look at how arrogant they are usually, but it also depends on who they are facing. Now the opposite is a big pirate offering a reward of 1.5 billion. They stand in front, aren't they courting death? Well, so many people, are they all here to welcome us? Sorata sat on the back of the camel, tore off the water bottle on one side, and turned to the left front, lying on the ground, throwing the wriggling Ikaram over. From a long distance, he felt the movement here. I didn't make a sound all the time, because I didn't know what happened here, and I didn't feel that someone would die. Observation hockey is not an eye. Although he can sense a person's breath, he has never seen Vivi before, so he doesn't know that these breaths are Vivi. He only made a sound when he felt Vivi's breath of extreme despair and K. Lockadar's undisguised murderous intent. He withdrew his gaze from Ikaram, turned his head to look at K. Lockdar. It should be said that it was Vivi behind K. Lockdar. After thinking about it for a while, he knew why Vivi was here. He moved forward slowly, in order to give K. Lock enough time to gather his subordinates. At this time, Vivi should have just joined the Barlock studio, so it is not surprising to be among the convened team. With Vivi's naive and impulsive character, it's strange that he can hold back the real mastermind behind the murder of Alabasta. Vivi, who has experienced many things in 2 years, may be able to hold back, as for now. Sorata looked down and landed on Karoo behind Vivi, with admiration in his eyes. I'm sorry, Doctor. Braver than most. It's good to suffer a little, so that we can remember today's powerlessness and the consequences of being so impulsive today, and it's good that we won't be so stupid when we encounter such things again in the future. It's okay, Kale, and it is very affectionate and loyal. Indigo jumped off the camel. This duck can be said to be the smartest animal in Alabasta. Since the appearance of Sorata and his party, there has been a faint aura that weighs on everyone's hearts, making them dare not make any unnecessary actions at all. Seeing Ikaram in the distance, who was gradually recovering his figure, Vivi breathed a sigh of relief. She turned her head to look at Indigo, who walked in, stood up quickly, and bowed to Indigo to salute. Indigo smiled at Vivi, then squatted down to check Karoo's injuries. She had just heard Sorata speak and knew that Indigo was a doctor. He had just come out of the peaceful palace and hadn't experienced the cruelty of the sea. It was understandable that he couldn't help but feel the urge when he saw his enemy. Looking at Vivi's dusty mess, a smile flashed in Sorata's eyes. To understanding. Puff, puff, puff. Walking towards Karoo, no one came to fence, and no one dared to fence. Dr. Indigo, please, go and see the duck's wound. Chapter 114 Betrayal. No, it's for survival, silver hair. Lockadar's gaze never left Sorata since Sorata appeared. He took a puff of cigarette, reached out his hand to hold the cigar, and said to Sorata, "What are you doing here?" "What are you doing?" Sorata looked back at Vivi, and reached out to take down the wine gourd. Boo. He opened his mouth and bit the mouth of the gourd, raised his head, and his throat squirmed. Goo goo. Drinks into the stomach. Belch. He put down the wine gourd, opened his mouth to breathe out the breath of alcohol, hiccuped, and then looked down at K-Lock Doll. Why does it feel like this guy doesn't have the hockey in the anime at all? Could it be that facing him, he had no confidence and was discouraged? He rubbed his chin for a moment, then joked to Clock Doll. What do you think I'm here for? Lock Doll, frowning, took 2 puffs on his cigarette. He looked at Sorata through the shredded tobacco, and saw the teasing in Sorata's eyes. Needless to say, he already knew the answer. Now that you know the answer, just hit it. Thinking of this, he raised his hand, his eyes flashed fiercely, and he was about to give orders to the surrounding men. Not urgent. Sorata looked at Clockadar, stretched out his hand and interrupted what he was about to say. He turned his head, looked at Robin, who was standing alone, raised the corner of his mouth, and smiled. Hey, this beautiful sister, why are you staying here? What about our camp? As he spoke, he jumped off the camel, raised the wine gourd with his left hand, and took another sip with his head raised. Robin. It was only then that Lock Doll realized that Robin hadn't come. He put down his hands, turned his head, and stared at Robin indifferently. What is this woman up to? Meeting a powerful person and wanting to betray him? Just like her countless betrayals before. Robin raised his head and met Sorata's eyes without any fear. The corners of her mouth raised slightly, and she said with a light smile, "Brother, I am not Clock Doll's subordinate. I have always been a collaborator with him, and I know that my strength may be nothing to you at any time. It's just an ant that can be crushed to death, but I still want to survive and fulfill my dream, so I don't want to participate in your disputes." As she said that, she put away her smile, stared at Sorata, and said, "Can you give me a chance to live? Although I am not afraid of death, there are too many people's expectations in me. If you want to die, you can, but you can't die so easily, it's here." Coming out of Sorata, she knew that K-Lock would never be able to beat Sorata. She had seen Admiral, Vice Admiral, and Shichibukai. Advertisement how Sorata made her feel, unfathomable. She was more calm, more confident, and more powerful than anyone she had ever met. To use 2 words to describe Sorata in her eyes, that is, invincible. Invincible courage, invincible self-confidence. That's why she didn't go to K-Lock Doll's side with other senior agents. There was hesitation before, but now there is no hesitation at all. Interesting. Sorata stared at Robin, his eyes flashed red, and his special observation hockey swept across the battlefield in an instant. On this battlefield, apart from them, only 4 auras are white representing goodness, most of the others are black representing evil, and a small part are gray representing chaos. As for K-Lockadar, the most powerful aura among the evil aura was so black that it was about to turn red. Don't look at this guy in the anime, he looks pretty good in the later stage, but in fact he is a villain through and through. Ha 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 ha. The red light in Sorata's eyes disappeared, and he looked at Robin, and suddenly laughed out loud. Fun, fun, fun. 3 interesting. 1 is that Robin made a wise decision. The second is that Robin really didn't let Aokiji let her go when she was a child. The third is because Robin has experienced countless darkness since he was a child, but he didn't really fall into the darkness. In Sorata's view, this is more meaningful and beautiful than ordinary life. Sorata raised her head and took a sip of the wine, looked down at Robin and said with a smile. Okay. For the sake of showing me such a beautiful human brilliance, I can let you go, let's go. Robin stared at Sorata, seeing that Sorata was not joking with her. A smile gradually appeared on her face, she turned and walked aside without saying anything. But he didn't leave, but stood there, watching the show. When Sorata and Robin were talking, Clockadar kept silent. He held back his anger, and waited for Sorata and Robin to finish talking before shouting at Robin. Nico Robin, you really want to betray me? Have you thought about the price? You know, only I can protect you. Robin glanced at K-Lock Doll, her eyes were full of peace, she looked away, and did not answer K-Lock Doll's question. Betray, so what about betrayal? She spent the 20 years of wandering in the sea, betraying and being betrayed. After so many years, she has long been used to being alone and lonely. In her heart, being able to live is already the best gift God has given her. Advertisement others dare not expect extravagantly. Of course, it would be even better if there was history to explain to her. Goo, ha 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 ha. Seeing Robin's attitude, K-Lock already knew the woman's answer. He angrily bit off the cigar in his mouth, stared at Robin, and laughed angrily. Okay, 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 okay. Stupid woman, I will let you know the price of betraying me. As he spoke, he turned his head to stare at Sorata with a fierce look in his eyes. It was this guy who ruined everything about him, and now let the collaborator he found betray him. He raised his hand and shouted, give it to me, tear them up for me. What? The minions of Barlock Studio felt as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They raised their weapons and stared at Sorata and his gang with a fierce look in their eyes. So what if the big pirate with a bounty of 1.5 billion is on the opposite side? They were indeed startled by Sorata's sudden appearance earlier. But now I have reacted. There are so many of them, so many weapons, and there are Shichibukai. Can they be afraid of just a few people from the silver-haired gang? They can drown the silver-haired gang with just one mouthful of saliva. Well, it's scary. Sorata stared at the countless pairs of pupils shining fiercely behind K-Lockadar and shrank her neck. He hung the wine gourd back around his waist, waved his hands in front of him, stepped back, and shouted in horror, dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. As he spoke, he glanced at Ahua and the others, got off the camel, and winked at them. Okay. The 3 of Ahua understood instantly. Awa jumped out and exaggeratedly said to Sorata, Sorata, are you okay? Sorata withdrew her gaze, looked at the crowd in the distance, and stammered, yes, yes, yes. As he spoke, he stood up straight, turned around in a circle, and raised his hands high. Is it going to be okay? The 3 of Awa hurriedly cooperated, and said loudly, so it's all right. Ha 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 ha. Kuina was on the side, watching the performance of Sorata and the others with a smile on his face. As for the Firebirds, they retreated behind the camel, set up their cameras, and prepared to shoot. Of course, he didn't film the actions of Sorata and Ahua. If he did, he was afraid that Sorata would settle accounts with him afterwards. Chapter 115 The Weak Retreat. UB *********D. UB ********** D. Lockdar stared at the 4 of Sorata, with veins popping out of his forehead. Who do you think I am? Lousy as Shichibukai, Lockdar. Oh, the 3 of Sorata and Ahua all turned their heads to stare at Clockadar, who was about to explode, and said innocently, so what? Ha 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 ha. Look at this guy, he feels like he's almost cooked. If you say he's sand, will he be burned into glass if he's cooked? Sorata put her hands on her knees and laughed, glass, glass, glass. Ha 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 ha. The 3 of Ahua didn't know the stock of Sorata's laugh, but this didn't affect them laughing along with Sorata. Fire, fire me. K-Lockadar stared at Sorata, his eyes were bloodshot, and the murderous intent in his heart was about to break through his chest. Kaka. What? The bullets were loaded, and the one without a gun held a knife, and rushed towards Sorata with a roar. The 3 of Ahua put away the smiles on their faces, stepped back, and stood behind Sorata. Sorata straightened up, staring at K-Lock Doll, eyes rolled. The weak retreat. Click, boom, thunder during the day. A domineering aura instantly swept across the entire battlefield. Behind Clock Doll, Countless people who were raising their guns and preparing to shoot, and countless people from Locke Studio who were walking towards Sorata, froze in place as if they had been collectively immobilized. Boom, with the first, there's the second, bang bang bang. Countless falls sounded, splashing dust all over the floor. There is no need to turn around, Cloak Dar also knows the situation behind him, he is not a rookie pirate. Huh, Conqueror's Hockey. K. Lockadar took a deep breath and stared at Sorata with indifferent and serious eyes. Now, the anger in his heart has completely disappeared. Those who have Conqueror's Hockey are not necessarily the world's top pirates, but the world's top pirates must be the owners of Conqueror's Hockey. He still knows this. Feeling that Vivi behind him and Ikaram on the right have not been affected in any way, he can know that Sorata's Conqueror's Hockey is obviously not just awakened, but has been awakened a long time ago. Advertisement. This guy's control of Conquerors is so precise. What is this? Vivi turned his head to look at the countless fallen figures behind him, his eyes widened. Calical. Indigo connected Karu's dislocated joint in a few strokes. He straightened up, met Vivi's surprised eyes, and said with a smile. Our captain is a real man with the qualifications of a king. King qualifications? Vivi recovered slightly, her lips twitched, and she muttered, the king, the king. Then her eyes lit up, and she remembered. She raised her head, looked at Indigo, and said affirmatively, only one person in a million has Conqueror's Hockey. Calical. Indigo smiled and nodded, then patted Karu on the head, lowered his head and smiled at Karu. Okay, you can get up now. Gah. Karu struggled to stand up. It staggered and turned around a few times at first, and after fully adapting, it rushed towards Vivi happily. He rushed to Vivi and yelled loudly at Vivi, quack quack. With a happy smile on Vivi's face, she nodded to Karu and said, it's okay, Karu. Gah, it's okay, I'll let you have something to do now. Without K. Lockdoll's instructions, the 4 senior agents also knew that today would be impossible. Mr. 5 turned his head, stared at Indigo, lowered his nose-picking hand, then pinched a black booger, bent his middle finger, clasped his thumb, and shot at Indigo. This guy is a doctor from the silver-haired group, and the reward is only 20 million, you should die early. Indigo watched the booger bomb approaching swiftly, without moving. He stood where he was, without any movement in his eyes. Just when the booger bomb was about to hit Indigo, a figure appeared in front of Indigo instantly at an extremely fast speed, as if teleporting. UB*********D. What do you want to do, Dar Doctor? Well, are you in such a hurry to seek death? The person with a fat belly, his right hand turned into a rabbit paw, slapped the oncoming booger bomb, and immediately slapped the booger bomb away. Boom, the booger bomb flew into the air with a whoosh and exploded immediately. Oh, how disgusting. It didn't take long before the man's right hand returned to its original state. He stood on the spot, stamped his feet, and kept shaking his hands, as if he had touched something extremely disgusting. Only then did everyone see the face of the person who came. If it wasn't Awa, who was it? Advertisement, Hanajiro. Mr. 5 stared at Awa with a serious expression on his face. This guy's speed is too fast. He didn't even know how this guy passed through them and how he got behind them. Not to mention him, even the strongest R.1 among them, Daz Bonus, can only see an afterimage. K. Lockdoll could see Ahua's movements clearly, but he couldn't stop him, because Sorata's aura kept locking him. Seeing Awa lowering his head, shaking his hands incessantly, and looking extremely disgusted, Mr. 5's forehead bulged with veins, kicked his legs on the ground, and rushed towards Awa quickly. So what about speed? He is the explosive man who ate the fruit of the explosion. As long as he touches it, no one can escape his own explosion. When I got closer, I saw that Ahua was still indifferent. A fierce light flashed in Mr. 5's eyes. He retracted his right hand, the veins on his arm protruded, and his arm instantly grew bigger. He jumped up, and hit Ahua on the head with his fist the size of a sandbag. Small, Vivi saw Mr. 5 running towards him, and before he could say, heart, he saw Awa standing up, and his right hand turned into a rabbit's paw again. Boom, Awa squeezed Mr. 5's fist, which seemed small compared to his current palm, turned his head and grinned at Vivi, and said with a smile, this beautiful lady, what's so small? Boom, at this moment, behind Ahua's head, there was an explosion sound in his palm, and the flame rose up, illuminating Vivi's face. Vivi looked at Ahua's unscathed rabbit hand, and was taken aback for a moment. Under the firelight, Vivi's beautiful cheeks shone red. Amazing. Ha 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 ha. Awa laughed out loud when he heard Vivi's praise. His face was full of complacency. UB**********D. Mr. 5, who was in the air, tried hard to pull his fist out of Ahua's palm, but he couldn't pull it out with all his strength. He stared at Awa, his pupils were bloodshot. If you can't get it out, don't do it. He ignored the fist that was being squeezed by Awa, and retracted his other hand, also clenched into a fist, facing the back of Ahua's head, and smashed it hard. It's really courting death. Sensing the dangerous aura coming from behind, the smile on Ahua's face disappeared immediately. He turned his head and stared at Mr. 5, with a hint of disgust flashing in his eyes. This guy actually hit him with booger, disgusting him. What is it if he is not courting death? Apparently he completely forgot that it was he who took the initiative to pick up Mr. 5's booger. But these are not important. Awa stared at Mr. 5. His body swelled rapidly and became bigger in an instant. He suddenly turned into a fat white rabbit 4 meters high. The whirlwind formed by the momentum rolled up the sand under Ahua's feet and blew it around. Chapter 116 The flickering knife light brings fear. Vivi put her hand on her forehead, her hair was blown by the wind and kept swaying behind her. Let's go. Don't disturb their elegant mood, let's just go and watch the excitement. Indigo reached out and patted Vivi on the shoulder, then turned and walked towards Ikaram. Let's go. There seems to be another patient over there. Is it someone of yours? Let's go there to watch the fun, also check the gentleman's injuries by the way. Good. Hearing Indigo's words, Vivi quickly looked away, turned around to follow Indigo's pace, and headed towards Ikaram. As soon as Awa appeared, she could see that Awa seemed to be playing tricks on the other party, so she wasn't too worried. Instead, Ikaram was sucked dry by Klokadar before. That painful look, even if I have replenished water now, I think it must be uncomfortable now. Thinking of this, she looked at Ikaram and couldn't help but quicken her pace. Ikaram, are you all right? Vivi walked to Ikaram and asked in a low voice. Gah, behind Vivi, Karu also stuck out his head, showing concern at Ikaram. I'm fine. Ikaram raised his head, looked at Vivi and Karu, and smiled at them with a grin. Seeing Ikaram's smiling face, Vivi quickly bent down to support his right hand. Ikaram withdrew his gaze, lowered his head, his right hand was supported by Vivi, his left hand was on the ground, he gritted his teeth and wanted to stand up. But his body's functions have just recovered, and his body has been dehydrated for a while. His body and internal organs have all suffered injuries to varying degrees. It is still difficult to stand up now. And he is not a monster like Juan Luffy, nor is he transformed by devil fruit like the third brother R3, he is just an ordinary person. Being sucked dry of all the water in the body, not dying immediately, and waiting for Sorata and others to arrive, the body is already considered strong. Boom, Ikaram struggled to get up, but couldn't take it anymore, couldn't bear the screams coming from his body, and sat down on the ground. Ikaram. Vivi looked at Ikaram and shouted anxiously, then turned his head and looked at Indigo who was walking over. Doctor. Fine. Indigo took a step forward, squatted down, took Ikaram's left hand, closed his eyes, and felt for a while. How is it? Doctor. Advertisement Indigo put down his hands, stood up, looked down at Vivi's anxious eyes, and said with a smile. It's okay. Although the internal organs have been damaged to varying degrees, as long as you have a good rest, add more water, and add my medicine. It won't be long before he recovers. Who? Vivi breathed a sigh of relief, turned his head, and said happily to Ikaram, Ikaram, don't get up yet, just sit here and rest. Indigo turned his head and glanced at Ikaram with a complex look in his eyes. All he said was true, but one thing he didn't say was that Ikaram's life would probably be lost for many years. Is it really so easy to recover from damaged internal organs? Ikaram is not some powerful monster, this guy is just an ordinary person. Ignoring Ikaram and Wei Waxi, Indigo shook his head, turned around, and looked at the distant battlefield. I saw that the battlefield in the distance had been divided into 4 pieces. Iowa is playing with R4 Mr. 5, Adao is fighting Mikita. Kuina faced Daz Bonus, and Zala, pointed at Bailuo with a gun, stood still and did not dare to move. These 4 battlefields are actually nothing to watch. They are basically crushed. If they don't want to be active and face to face, these 4 senior agents may be defeated. After all 3 of Awa know armament hockey, and they can also shave this kind of fast movement that can be called invincible in the first half of the Grand Line. As for Kuina, needless to say, Kuina stared at Daz Bonus, leaned forward, took a step forward with his right foot, held the scabbard of Hedao Yuen in his left hand, with the handle facing up, and held the handle on the handle with his right hand. Boom, the ground collapsed in an instant, and Kuina's figure disappeared from the sight of everyone. Shin. Everyone only heard the pleasant sound of the knife being unsheathed, and then clang, the sound of gold and iron clashing sounded. Daz Bonus, his whole body turned into the shape of a knife, froze in place. One sword style, Juhei, all things cut. It was only then that everyone saw that a cold knife light pierced the sky and crossed Daz Bonus's chest. Ding, behind Daz Bonus, Kuina's left foot is in front and his right foot is behind. The scabbard of Hedao Yizi on his left hand is vertically attached to his left leg and inserted into the ground. During the sharpening, insert the last segment of the blade downward. R1-inch advertisement. Whether it was R.4 and Mikita who were engaged in the battle, or Zala who was pointed at by Arlo, they all stopped their movements and turned their heads to look at Daz Bonus in horror. Kuina straightened up without looking at Daz Bonus behind her. She raised her head, glanced at Sorata, a smile flashed in her eyes, then turned her head to stare at Clock Doll, and stepped towards him. Go. When Sorata was fighting Mahawk, she couldn't help the fighting factor in her body. Now meeting another Shichibukai, how can she bear it? So without Sorata's instructions, she took out Daz Bonus quickly, so that she could try the quality of this Shichibukai before Sorata did it. As soon as Kuina took a step, there was a piercing sound like broken steel coming from behind her. Ka 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 ka. Daz Bonus behind Kuina, his hands turned into knives in front of his body, were cut off from the middle without a sound. The broken hand quickly fell to the ground, splashing faint dust. And the blade in that hand also immediately changed back to its original state. Looking at Daz Bonus's chest again, I saw a small crack extending from Daz Bonus's chest to his back. After a while, blood quickly spread out from the tiny cracks. If it weren't for the opponents staring at them, they couldn't help the fear in their hearts and wanted to run away. Gudu. Boom, the strongest of them all. Behind her came the dull sound of something heavy falling to the ground. Then it slid faster and faster when Kuina took the second step. But this is just thinking about it, with the three of Awa watching, how could they escape? A knife that you can't even see. Like machines, they slowly turned their heads and looked at Kuina with horror. Lubricated by the blood, Daz Bonus's upper body suddenly slid slowly to one side. Died. Until he died, he didn't know why he died. What the hell is this? Is it so strong? Zala, Mr. 5. Mikita swallowed their saliva in unison, looking at the body of Daz Bonus that was broken in half on the ground. Because in his line of sight, Kuina has been standing in front of him without moving. How to spell? One knife. Only then did the light in Daz Bonus' eyes completely disappear. Chapter 117. It may be too comfortable sometimes, which is not a good thing. The three of Awa stared at their prey with mockery in their eyes. Seeing that the three of Zala were frozen in place, they didn't move, just watching them quietly. They were not in a hurry to get rid of the three of Zala so quickly. After all, let's play. What are you in a hurry for? On the edge of the battlefield, Firebird raised his camera and took a quick shot of Kuina, with the excitement on his face showing through. Handsome, so handsome. Yeah, Kuina Big Sister is indeed the number 2 of the Silver Hair Pirates, so strong. Although none of them could clearly see the speed of Kuina's knife attack, it didn't affect their appreciation of Kuina's heroic posture in beheading Daz Bonus in a snap. Firebird turned the camera and took pictures of the equally handsome Iluo and Adao, but only Awa was missed. He is the only person who knows Ahua's abilities other than world government and marine, and of course he knows Ahua's situation. If it weren't for the sudden reward offered by the world government to Awa 4 months ago, the silver-haired gang wouldn't have disappeared for 4 months, right? Only the fewer people know Ahua's true strength, the safer Awa can be. He still has this emotional intelligence. So the silver-haired group, he can shoot anyone, but he can't shoot Awa. After all, with Ahua's current strength, it really can't be regarded as a bounty as high as 500 million. Although he did this, it may be superfluous. From the appearance of the silver-haired gang, we can know that they should be ready to face everything. But who can guarantee that Awa is really willing to be discovered by the outside world about his true strength? So it's better to pat other people more. Anyway, there is no more Ahua, and there is nothing less if he is less. The reward of 500 million berry is better to maintain a certain sense of mystery. Sorata looked at Kuina, felt her fighting spirit rise, and shrugged. Kuina wants to fight, let her fight, also just in time to try the fineness of Lock Doll. After all, when this guy was young, he was a person who could split 50-50 with Bullet. Even if he didn't put his efforts into hockey, the development of the fruit should have reached a very high level. Otherwise, a random vice admiral can rub this guy on the ground, so he has to be a Shichibukai **. Yo, Sorata turned her head, stared at K-Lock Dar, and said with a smile, Shichibukai, K-Lock Dar, you can play with Kuina, don't die. Play? Lock Doll looked behind Kuina, lying on the ground, lifeless, the two halves of Daz Bonus's body, trembling. Not fear, but anger. He turned his head, fixed his eyes on Sorata, then opened his hands wide, and an extremely ferocious aura emanated from his body. Play? Goo ha 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 ha, play? Who do you think I am, you little brat? Do you really think that you came here to travel? Did you come to let me play with you? Woo! Advertisement on the palm of his hand, there were 2 rotating small sandstorms, which were gradually getting bigger. He looked at Sorata, his blood-red pupils were full of murderous intent. Does this brat really think he is an ordinary pirate? Go to hell. Sandstorm. Clockadar yelled at Sorata, and threw Uzumaki, who had turned into a large sandstorm, towards Sorata. Sorata turned a deaf ear to Lockheeder's roar, bent his legs and sat down, as if sitting on a sofa, in the void behind him. He then pulled off the wine gourd on his waist, leaned his back against the void, raised the wine gourd, raised his head and took a sip of the wine, then squinted his eyes, ignoring the approaching sandstorm. The whole person is full of extreme arrogance towards K-Lock Dar. Before he met K-Lock Doll, he was still a little interested in K-Lock Doll. Because this guy has been in New World for a long time, and his reputation is not low, it is impossible not to know the existence of hockey. But after meeting this guy, he was completely disappointed. This guy really doesn't have hockey. What the hell do you think you are, Admiral? It is at the level of Admiral, and at least one of their 2-color hockey is top-notch. Is at least one item. Because of Akainu and Aokiji, he hasn't met yet, so he can only use Kazaru as the standard. Others, Kazaru, basically rely on fruit ability, but at least observation hockey has been trained to the top level. Although armament hockey is not the strongest, it is not far from the strongest. That guy has never used armament hockey against the enemy, and he can train armament hockey to that point. Who do you think you are, knowing the existence of hockey, but not developing hockey? If this guy really has the fatal weakness of water, then any vice admiral can rub this guy on the ground. Because looking at this guy's appearance, his physical fitness is probably not as good as Smoker's. People Smoker is defeated, at least he knows how to exercise well. Moreover, in less than 2 years, he has already awakened observation hockey, and his armed color has also been greatly improved. On the other hand, K-Lock Doll was in New World more than 20 years ago. If you want to mix in New World, then the strength cannot be too low, and this guy can escape from the peak Whitebeard, which is enough to prove that this guy has been very strong many years ago. Looking at it now, after so many years, it has not improved much. If no one knew his Achilles heel, this guy would have gone to see Shinigami long ago. It was because the first half of the Grand Line was too low level, making this guy really naive to think that he was invincible. Still, like Moria, she was shattered by Whitebeard. This is not known to outsiders. Whoosh, advertisement. The sound of bodies rubbing against air. Kuina instantly appeared in front of Sorata at a speed completely invisible to the naked eye. She raised her head, and her dark blue ponytail was constantly swaying by the sandstorm in front of her and the wind blowing up. Through the gap of sand and dust, she stared at K-Lock-Dar on the opposite side, her eyes turned cold. Your opponent is me now. As she spoke, she held the knife in her left hand and lifted it upwards, touched the handle of the knife with Hedao Yuan with her right hand, leaned forward, and made a gesture of drawing the knife. She, one sword-style EI/wave. The sound of knives resounded throughout the battlefield. In front of Kuina, a huge, crescent-shaped silver-white slash quickly moved towards the two sandstorms. Puff, puff. The encounter of knife light and sandstorm is like the encounter of knife and jelly. The silver-white slash easily shattered the sandstorm, and slashed a Clockadar behind the sandstorm without any loss of speed. Puff, the slash easily sliced through K-Lock's body, and protruded from K-Lock's body, leaving a narrow, bottomless crack on the sand behind him. Clockadar looked down at the severed chest, then raised his head, opened his hands, and laughed wildly at Kuina. Little devil, who do you think Laozi is? Laozi is a completely different pirate from ordinary pirates. The development of devil fruit also has a level. With your fragile armament hockey, it is still far from enough to hurt Laozi. Far. Ha ha ha. What are you using to fight me? In this desert, what do you use to fight me? Goo, ha 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 ha. What do you ask me to fight with you? Kuina was not affected by K-Lock-Doll's words. She stared at K-Lock-Doll, her eyes fixed, and then her legs quickly kicked on the ground. Boom, the ground under her feet collapsed instantly. Whoosh, Kuina's figure disappeared instantly and appeared in front of K-Lockadar. She turned to the right, holding the knife at shoulder level with her right hand, holding the knife on the handle with her left hand, and holding the knife with both hands, the point of the knife facing K-Lock-Dale. She turned her head to stare at K-Lock-Dar, who was close at hand, and said indifferently, "You ask me what to fight with you, right?" As she spoke, she exerted force with her hands, and a jet of black armament hockey wrapped around Hedao Yumanji in an instant, making the white blade of Hedao Yumanji turn into a black knife as if it had been coated with a layer of black paint. Without the slightest hesitation, she turned her body, holding Hidao's hands, slanted downward, and slashed hard at K-Lockadar. One knife flow swallow return. Chapter 118. What an enviable brat. Dangerous, extremely dangerous. K-Lock-Doll stared at Kuina, who suddenly appeared in front of him. At this moment, he felt his neck, chest, and lower limbs all at the same time, like a needle P*******. K. Although this brat's arm color can kill him, it shouldn't be able to cause fatal damage to him. He looked at the three spatula lights cut by Kuina. The smile on his face disappeared instantly, and before he had time to retreat, he quickly elementalized the part of the body in front of the sword lights. But he underestimated Yan Hui's speed, and before he had time to fully elementalize, the three spatulas slashed at his neck, chest and legs. Puff puff. The light of the knife cut through Locke's body in an instant, bringing out 3 streaks of blood. Small injury. Locke Doll breathed a sigh of relief when the 3 spatula lights disappeared. But at this moment, he suddenly felt the breath of death. Yes, it is the breath of death, this breath of being swallowed by death. He only felt it when fighting Whitebeard. No, it's the back. He didn't even have time to react, and the returned 3 spatulas slashed firmly on his back. Puff, this time it wasn't the front, this time it was when Clock Doll was completely off guard. Although Kuina's current hockey has just entered the advanced level, although her hockey is still not comparable to K-Lock's fruit development. But, this is when Lock Doll was completely unprepared, and he really slashed at the guy's body. Although Lockheater's fruit ability and Lobia's passivity blocked most of the damage for him, but this is the slash of the great swordsman. Even with most of the blocks blocked, Clock Doll suffered serious physical injuries. Looking from behind, he could only see 3 huge wounds that penetrated deep into the internal organs on his back, bleeding out continuously. Cough. Lock Doll seemed to be drained of all his strength, his legs staggered, his body swayed, and he stepped back. He stretched out his left hand to cover his mouth to prevent the blood from gushing out of his throat, and stretched his right hand behind him. He felt that there were 3 leaks in his back. Tick, tick, tick. The blood kept pouring out from Clockeater's back, staining his clothes and coat red in a short while, and then dripping down the corner of the coat to the dry sand. Now you know what I'm going to fight with you. Kuina stood up straight, staring at K-Lock Doll, with a look of sarcasm on his face, then let go of the word Wadao with his left hand, turned the blade with his right hand, raised it upwards, and swung it diagonally to the right. Puff, bloodline on the knife, leaving a piercing, 1, in the sand to Kuina's right. K-Lock, Darl, now you know, Kuina asked again. The tone of this sentence is completely different from the previous sentence, and this sentence is full of sarcasm. These Lobia guys are always so self-righteous. The smoker in Rogtown is like this, and this Shichibukai is also like this. Do you really think Lobia is invincible? Advertisement. Cough. Cough cough. K-Lock covered his mouth and kept coughing. He knew that he was careless. If he hadn't been so arrogant and prepared for elementalization in advance, even if he was injured, he wouldn't have been injured so badly. Now there are 3 holes in his back. Others don't know the fatal flaw of his fruit. How could he not know? With this level of scars, he couldn't even stop, but although it can't be stopped, it can slow down the bleeding. He put down his hand, let the blood gushing out from the corner of his mouth, and then his back became elemental, trying to use sand to block the wound. There was no way to do this. If he didn't do this, he might not last long, and he would fall to the ground due to excessive bleeding. Little devil, I admit that I was careless, but next, I won't be so lucky. Lockdoll stared at Kuina, first the legs, then the hands, and then the whole body, and the whole body became elemental. The wind blows. The sand completely disappeared in place with the wind. Of course, Clockdar also disappeared in place. Kuina touched the handle of the knife with her right hand, and watched her surroundings vigilantly, with a red light in her eyes. Woo! Rustle. The wind kept blowing, and there was no movement around, as if that guy K-Lock had never been there. At this moment, Kuina turned around suddenly, and with a squeaky sound, she drew her knife and slashed behind her. Puff, sand. Kuina stared at the pillar of sand protruding from the ground in front of him, with a red light in his eyes, and turned his head to the right. I saw a golden hook weapon, from behind her, rubbed against Kuina's neck, shot forward, landed on the sand, and disappeared. Trouble. Kuina stared at the place where the hook disappeared, lowered her head, stared at the ground, her eyes were more solemn than ever. This guy has completely merged with this desert, and her observation haki can't sense any breath. Kuina raised her head and taunted her surroundings. Are you still a Shichibukai, only hiding your head and showing your tail? Little devil, don't be so self-righteous. K-Lockdoll's voice sounded from all directions. Okay, at this moment, Kuina suddenly looked down at her feet. Without any hesitation, she stepped on the ground with both feet. With a sound of whoosh, it disappeared in place. I saw where she was standing before. With a bang, a golden hook rushed out from the sand. Advertisement. Any of your attacks is useless in front of me. What else can you do except hide and attack? Don't be so self-righteous, brat. Desert Great Sword. Behind Kuina, a sand knife made of condensed sand quickly cut towards Kuina's back from the sand. Isn't it all said? Is it useless? Holding the saber in both hands, Kuina turned around, took a step ahead of the desert sword, swung the saber quickly, and cut off the sand saber with a poof. Desert Vajra saber. Just when Kuina cut off the great desert sword in front of her, behind her, a figure condensed with sand opened her hands, which turned into 2 big knives, and then quickly cut towards Kuina like a pair of scissors. Puff, while the red light was flashing, he said a word, easily cut off Sha Ying's hands, and cut off Sha Ying. Kuina kicked her feet on the ground and jumped into the air. She stared at the place where the sand shadow was just below. I saw that the ground below was in a circle, and the sand was constantly flowing towards a hole in the middle. Kuina stepped on the moonwalk, stood in the air, stared at the sand below, and taunted loudly. Clockadar, is that all you have? If that's all you have, then I won't play with you. She wants this guy to come out and fight her, otherwise, this guy is hiding underground, and she has nothing to do with him. Lockdar, who was deep in the desert, stared at Kuina parked in Sorata with murderous intent in his eyes. Observation haki. What kind of monsters are these guys? He turned his head and glanced at Arlo, who had been sitting on the camel with his gun raised, and then looked at Sorata. One of the pirates who went out to sea with a full budget, only 5 months old, actually has 3 people who know how to observe haki. This quality, in New World, can only be possessed by a very small number of pirates. Observation haki is not as common as armament haki. This thing not only needs to go through a lot of training, but most importantly, it also needs to be talented before it can be awakened. Although he didn't deliberately train his body in armament haki, he never forgot to train his dodging ability and neural responsibility in the past few decades. Armament haki doesn't matter, but observation haki, he wants it desperately. As long as observation haki is awakened, he can further develop the fruit ability and reach the level of admiral. What an enviable brat, and so young. K-Lockadar stared in the direction of Sorata, his eyes flickering non-stop, and at this moment he had the idea of retreating. He doesn't want to die, he still has a lot to do. He also has to go to New World to challenge Whitebeard. If he dies here, all his ambitions will be completely buried. Escape? Chapter 119 Escape? So what if you don't escape? The battle with the blue hair is like this, there's a stronger silver hair over there. He hates Gia now. The speed of these guys' knives was too fast, so fast that he couldn't react at all. If he was fighting against a strong man with fists at this time, then he wouldn't be so uncomfortable. Let's go. K-Lockadar looked through the thick sand, and took one last look at Sorata. His eyes were full of unwillingness and anger. This guy completely shattered the plan he had planned so hard. This guy is gone, and he can't stay in Alabasta anymore and continue to plan. Because Vivi is here, when Cobra comes back to know the truth, Cobra will definitely inform the whole country, and even go to the world government to deprive him of his Shichibukai status. These brats are really damned. He withdrew his gaze, his body turned into sand, and he walked silently under the boundless desert, heading towards Juba. It seems that we can only leave this island. As for his men, the people in Barlock's studio. Then he won't care about it. These guys were recruited by him to be cannon fodder. If the silver-haired gang were not too powerful, he would have wiped out all those who knew about his plan afterwards. Want to run? Sorata sat lazily on the void, and stopped holding the wine gourd. He turned his head to look at the strip of sand that was moving at high speed underground, with the corners of his mouth raised, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. This guy's whole body is elementalized and merged with this desert. If other people came today, even if it was 4 emperors, they might have to let this guy escape. Because this guy is in the sand, he has no breath or sound at all, and ordinary knowledgeable people, even top-notch ones, can't find this guy's trace. But this guy's figure, in his perception, is like a bright light in the dark night, so bright and dazzling. Because no matter how hard this guy hides, he can't hide the disgusting aura emanating from his evil soul. Unless this guy can even hide his soul. Sorata straightened up, and stood up from the void throne. He didn't stop K-Lock first, because he would have to fight this guy later, and there would be too much noise at that time, and it was obviously impossible to fight at the gate of this city. Let this guy run for a while, anyway, this guy is also a grasshopper in his palm, no matter how much he can run, he won't be able to escape. Advertisement. He turned his head and glanced at the 3 of Awa, and said with a smile, "What are you 3 still doing in a daze? Are you so weak? Why haven't you dealt with your opponents yet? Ha ha ha. Isn't it just itchy hands? Do you want to play for a while?" Ahua smiled awkwardly at Sorata, then turned to stare at Mr. 5 in front of him. The smile on his face disappeared, and a murderous intent flashed in his blood-red eyes. "Okay, I won't play with you anymore. Play." Mr. 5 was excited by Ahua's killing intent. He turned his head to meet Ahua's blood-red eyes, his heart subconsciously tightened, followed by a crazy will to survive. "No, I can't beat this guy. Run away, run away, run away." Without hesitation, Mr. 5 kicked his legs on the ground and ran behind him. As soon as he fought, he knew that he was not Ahua's opponent. If this guy hadn't been fighting him casually all the time, he would have fallen down a long time ago. Now his boss, Clock Dar, is nowhere to be seen. Maybe he ran away a long time ago, so why is he still here? Waiting to die? Run? Can you run away? Ahua looked at the back of Mr. 5, grinning, showing a cruel smile on his face. He bent his feet and kicked on the ground. Boom. The ground collapsed instantly, and his body, like a cannonball, drew an arc in Sorata. With a bang, it landed in front of Mr. 5. The huge 4-meter-high body completely blocked the sunlight, making Mr. 5's entire body shrouded in Ahua's shadow. "Run! Why are you running?" Awa raised his palm and patted Mr. 5. "It was like swatting a mosquito. I can't hide, and I can't run away." Mr. 5 looked at the slap coming rapidly from above. A trace of madness flashed in his eyes. "You don't want me to go, do you? Let's die together?" As he spoke, Mr. 5's whole body seemed to erupt from magma, with irregular cracks constantly appearing on the surface of his body. This is his final ultimate move, and also his final destination. That is self-destruct. Boom! Advertisement. Before Mr. 5 exploded, Awa slapped Mr. 5 into the sand. However, this obviously cannot prevent the explosion of Mr. 5. I saw Ahua's men. Countless rays of light shot around through the cracks in his palm in the ground, and then there was a huge explosion that resounded throughout the rainy ground. Boom! The shock wave of the explosion pushed Ahua's hand up immediately, and then an orange-red fireball kept expanding outward. Ahua stared at the fireball in front of him, and quickly covered armament hockey in front of him. He turned into a rabbit. Although his defensive power has greatly increased, he should not take it lightly. It is better to be careful. If the boat does not capsize in the gutter, he will be teased by Aluo for a long time. He didn't want to be made fun of by that guy. Boom! The second louder explosion came out, and a huge mushroom cloud rose from the seat where Ahua was standing, and the shockwave sandwiched the sand, forming a gale like a 12th level, rushing towards the surroundings quickly. Whoosh! Kuina's figure appeared beside Sorata. She turned around and looked at the mushroom cloud in the distance. Her pretty face was flushed red by the flames of the explosion. She didn't care about Awa, but talked about K-Lock Dar. "Run by that guy from K-Lock. It's okay, that guy can't run away." Sorata looked back and glanced at Kuina. The red light in his eyes disappeared. After 4 months of training, Ahua is no longer the same Ahua as before. This little explosion can't hurt him. "Wait a minute, I'll deal with that guy. It's not easy to do anything here. After all, I still want to take a good look at that guy's true strength. I can't let that guy fully play here." "Okay." Kuina nodded, looked away, turned and walked towards the camel. Nothing will happen to her after that. Logia ability users are really troublesome, especially in places that are geographically consistent with Logia's attributes. That guy is completely unarmed, and has no sense of knowledge. He can rely on this desert so that she can't find it at all. It seems that her sense of knowledge has to be strengthened. Otherwise, if you meet such an opponent in the future, you will have to catch him blind. There is absolutely no way to do it. In fact, what she doesn't know is that in this world, there are only a few Logias who can achieve the level of Clock Doll. And this guy, K-Lock, just fits the sand, which makes this guy so difficult to deal with in the desert. If you change the place, with the speed of Kuina's movement and knife, even if Haki does little damage to Clockadar, he can still consume the guy through continuous stacking damage. Of course, this is something that can only be done if that guy has no other means. Chapter 120 Meow. What a shame. Looking at the flames in the distance, Arlo pursed his lips in disdain. It actually gave the opponent a chance to explode. He shook his head and turned to stare at Zala. Dangerous. Zala suddenly felt cold all over his body, and all the hairs on his body stood up one by one. His fruit ability, as if stimulated by something, involuntarily produced countless long thorns all over his body. Especially her forehead, she felt as if a nail was being drilled in there, and the pain was unbearable. She knew that it was the guy who had been pointing the gun at him and was going to shoot him, but she didn't expect that guy to be so strong, and now he just showed her killing intent, which made her become like this. No time to think about it, she doesn't want to die, she wants to escape. This feeling of being on the verge of hell made her uncomfortable. Snapped, at this moment, before her body could execute the command she wanted to escape, a translucent bullet glowing with black light, piercing the air with the sound of the gun, appeared in the air as if teleporting, in front of Zala's eyebrows. How can it be so fast? At this moment, Zala felt as if time had stopped around her, and only her brain was still active. She stared at her eyes, and the bullet in front of her was reflected in her eyes, trying to hide, but can't escape. Her current body couldn't keep up with her current reaction speed at all. Yes, at this moment of life and death, she seemed to have awakened something extraordinary. But this thing is useless to her now. It will only make her feel more strongly and clearly that she is about to be dragged into hell by the abyss of death. Puff, the bullet shot from Zala's eyebrows into Zala's brain without any hindrance, and then Zala's brain expanded rapidly like an inflated ball, and then exploded from the middle like a watermelon. The flames from the explosion swallowed Zala's entire body in an instant, and then a second explosion came in a fireball. Boom, as the flames rose, a second mushroom cloud rose. Arlo stared at where Zala was standing, put down the gun, put his mouth on the muzzle, and blew. Perfect. Then he put down the gun stinkingly, stretched out his hands on both sides of his head, and touched his Shamat's head shape upwards. Do you need help? Arlo put down his hand, raised his gun, pointed the muzzle at Mikita above Adao, and looked at Adao. If you want help, just tell me, I like to hit the flying ones the most. Flying in the sky, Mikita, who was looking at the two mushroom clouds below, heard Aluo's voice, and felt a P in his heart, and he didn't know whether to say it or not. Advertisement. Her body rose, trying to stay away from the direction Arlo's gun was pointing at. Because the moment she was pointed at by this guy's gun, she felt the breath of death infinitely. It was a breath of death that one could not escape even if one wanted to escape. Fine. When Mikita went up, she couldn't help but glance down at Arlo. Fortunately, that guy ignored her. She doesn't think about anything else now, she just wants to get out of here as soon as possible. These guys are all monsters. The White Rabbit got serious and shot his partner R.4 to death with just one shot. The guy with the gun even fired bullets that were invisible to the eye, and that bullet will explode. Aren't you a human being? You don't show mercy to beauties. If you say you want to kill them, you'll kill them. Is this the member of the pirates who have a total bounty of more than 2 billion? It's too scary. Hey, if you don't do it again, that woman will run away. Aruo retracted the gun and yelled at Adao. That's all he said. With Adao's strength, how could he let that woman run away? Even if it can fly, it must not run. You don't need to tell me. Adao glanced at Aluo, took out the cigarette case from his trouser pocket unhurriedly, took out one and put it in his mouth. He took out the lighter, lit the cigarette, took a deep breath, raised his chin proudly, and looked at Mikita, who was constantly flying towards the desert outside the rainy land, with mockery in his eyes. Run? Can you run away? He put the lighter in his pocket, stared at the sky, opened his mouth and roared. Aim! Resounded throughout the world. Ha 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 ha. Aluo looked at Adao, put his hands on his stomach, and kept laughing. Finally let this guy use his fruit ability again. Adao gradually swelled with a creaking sound, and after a while, she turned into a yellow, orange cat, walking upright. The orange cat is not as fat as imagined, but full of muscles. The entire orange cat, like a warrior made of steel, is full of explosive power. Since he is so handsome and stylish, greater than W less than, meow, why is Aluo laughing? Adao's transformation is complete. He first glanced at Aluo with his yellow pupils, and seeing that Aluo was still laughing, he didn't go after Mikita, but yelled at Aluo full of anger. Aluo, you guy, do you want to fight? Take aim? Ha 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 ha. Advertisement. Aluo didn't stop laughing, but even louder. Don't always add a sight at the end of your speech. Don't you make me laugh? You be asterisk 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 d. Adao stared at Aluo. Her yellow pupils shrank for a while, and an angry look appeared on her face. Okay, haha. Seeing that Adao was about to get angry, Aluo quickly covered his mouth with his hand. He said to Adao, woo, haha, hurry up and chase that woman. Don't run away at that time, then he will laugh at you for a year. Ha 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 ha. I'll come back to clean you up later. Adao withdrew her gaze and stared at Mikita, who flew not far away. A trace of murderous intent flashed in her yellow pupils. He sank, bent his legs, and kicked on the ground. Boom, the ground suddenly collapsed, and Adao's body, under the bouncing power of her strong legs, shot towards Mikita quickly like a rocket. Whoosh, in an instant, she was in front of Mikita. So the first time he got the fruit, he ate it without hesitation. As long as his eyes turned into cat pupils, he could see the traces of anything, even Sorata's slash. However, these can be gradually strengthened through acquired training. Moreover, the orange cat fruit also endowed him with a particularly flexible physique. Don't look at the muscles all over his body now and think that his body is very rigid. He believes that one day he will be able to do it, as long as it is an attack that he sees, he can dodge it. 4 months ago, they found a devil fruit just a few days after arriving in Little Garden. After eating it, I realized that this fruit is zone cat fruit orange cat form. Arlo said, kicking his legs in the air. Run? In front of me. Where are you running? Take aim. Without the illustrated book of devil fruit, none of them know what this devil fruit is, but for a Dao who is eager to improve his strength, he doesn't care as long as it is a fruit that can improve his strength. His eyes also have strong dynamic vision, it's just that the reaction can't keep up and can't hide. And that's not all. Boom. This thing is not the two fruits of a Luo and a Hua. This thing has added a lot of physical fitness from the beginning, so his armament hockey is the first to awaken among the three of them, and it is also the strongest. It stopped firmly in front of Mikita. There is indeed rigidity, but more of it is softness. He can control every muscle in the body, and can even penetrate into small places like a fluid. Chapter 121. Can you escape? Hey, this fruit is strong, it is really strong, but it is not good. That is, as long as he becomes a cat, he will involuntarily add the word, aiming, at the end of every sentence he says. Because of this, he was laughed at by a Luo and a Hua for a long time. Moreover, whenever he transforms into a cat, these two guys can't help but laugh endlessly. This made him very distressed. Although neither of these two guys is his opponent when they are sparring, as long as he turns into a cat form, these two guys who usually don't like each other will join hands to deal with him. What the hell? Every time he thought that these two guys had finished making fun of him and would join forces to deal with him, he wanted to swear. Staring at the thin girl in front of him compared to his current body, a Dao raised his right hand and slapped it without hesitation. He will sympathize with the weak, but not the weak among the villains. As long as it is evil, it is better to die, can't hide. Mikita stared at the huge palm that was approaching quickly. Her face no longer had the usual big smile, but was full of horror. Anyone who is a person will be afraid of death, no matter who he is. At the moment of death, no one can face it calmly, unless he doesn't care about his own life at all. Apparently Mikita wasn't that kind of person. Although she is a villain, she is used to tragedies, and even gave death to countless people. Now it is her turn. Her current performance is not better than those weak people she laughed at, but even more embarrassed and terrified. Boom. She didn't give her too much time to feel the past and lament the meaning of life. A Dao's palm, from top to bottom, slapped her hard on the head. Puff, the blood sprayed out of her mouth quickly as if it was lifeless, and then her whole body, under a Dao's palm, shot fiercely towards the ground below like a meteorite. Advertisement boom, the earth collapsed instantly, and then outward from the center of the landing, the land bulged upward like a wave, and then spread outward under the influence of the shockwave. Due to the high speed, it is impossible to tell whether her body is on the back or the front of the body first. Anyway, judging from her body that is already twisted into a ball, it is obvious that no matter which side she lands on, it is impossible for her walked out of the deep pit formed by the impact alive. A Dao smoked a cigarette, and glanced indifferently at the body of Mikita, who was no longer human, in the deep pit below, and with a bang, the figure disappeared in place. Moonwalk. The moonwalk that only Kuina can use, can also be used when he transforms. This is why he is stronger than a Luo and a Hua in the case of pure competition. Of course, if it is a desperate situation, he may not be Arlo's opponent now, because this guy is not one person now, but two. Unfair. As for a Hua, this guy is a chef. Although he can increase his strength through rage for a short time, it can't last long, and they are just sparring. He has never seen this guy really use rage, so he can't know the situation of this guy's full strength. Next, how strong is it? Of course, those two guys have cards, but he doesn't? It's the slowest every time. Aluo looked at the figure that suddenly appeared beside him, and said with a slightly mocking tone, "It's still my partner, Dark Hound, awesome, unlike you. The movement is loud and the time is still long, haha." A Dao ignored Aluo's ridicule. He glanced at the white rabbit that appeared beside him, his body gradually shrunk, and he put away his beast form. Haha. Did I miss something just now? The white rabbit gradually shrunk, revealing Ahua's figure. He patted the dust on his head and exhaled a puff of black smoke. Then he turned his head to look at the flames in the distance, and said with a smile, "Haha. That guy is quite interesting, he almost hurt me." Okay, they're all young people. I originally thought that this 7 warlords of the sea would have interesting subordinates. I didn't expect that they were all ostentatious weaklings. They are all very powerful fruit ability users, but it's all superficial. Atao's pupils were lit with fire. He stretched out his hand to hold the cigarette, and exhaled a smoke ring from his mouth, then turned to look at the desert in the distance. There are only the 7 warlords of the sea, and the one who was instantly killed by Kuina. The knife man, with knives all over his body, is a bit interesting. As for the others, he shook his head and stopped talking. Ahua and Aluo also turned around and looked at the desert in the distance. There is their ultimate goal for this Alabasta, but after seeing how Lock Doll played against Kuina earlier, they shook their heads in unison. A moment of silence for that Shichibukai advertisement. The trash who only knows fruit ability, facing armament hockey who has reached the top Sorata, that scene, they can know without thinking. As a member of the 7 warlords of the sea, one of the three major forces in the world, it is quite outrageous that he does not know hockey. Although they admit that this guy's fruit development has reached an extremely advanced level, but this guy is facing Sorata and wants to run. Can you run away? I really can't escape. Lokdar, who was deep in the sand, stared at the silver-haired figure in front of his head and his heart twitched. No matter where he ran, no matter how many times he changed directions, Sorata always appeared in front of him like a prophet. It's not that he doesn't want to move forward, but that he feels that if he moves forward, he will encounter danger. Deadly danger. What the hell? What kind of monster is this? This guy can actually sense his existence. You must know that he is full of elements, hiding in this boundless desert. It is sand itself, and if it merges with this desert, let alone ordinary people, even if Whitebeard comes, he is confident that Whitebeard will not find him. Otherwise, he would have died long ago when he challenged Whitebeard. Lokdar stared at Sorata standing in the desert like a god through the sand, firmly blocking his way, with a gloomy and terrifying expression. He bit his teeth together fiercely, looking up, his blood-red pupils revealed fierceness. Don't let me go. A tyrannical breath emanated from his body. Then let you feel, the horror of me, the god of the desert. An extremely tyrannical breath rushed out of the sand and soared into the sky. What? Sorata stared down at the sand obliquely ahead, with a hint of interest on his face. Locke's breath is just below that, in his eyes, that guy is like a light in the dark night, only if he runs away will he be a ghost. Interesting. Chapter 122. Is this your last card? The sand in front of him suddenly trembled violently, and a chilling aura was continuously spreading out from the ground. It's like a ferocious beast that is waking up is hidden underground. Wow, the three of Ahua looked at the sand that suddenly rose up in the distance, and let out an exclamation from their mouths. Bump, at this moment, a giant golden hand broke through the sand and stood in the desert like a huge five-elements mountain. The huge palm continued upward, revealing the arm underneath. After rising to a certain height, the arm stopped, and then slapped fiercely towards Sorata in front. The huge palm covered the sky and the sun, and before it approached, it caused a typhoon of level 12 to blow around Sorata. The ground under Sorata's feet sank in an instant. And Sorata's figure, in front of the giant hand, is as small as an ant. But, Sorata raised her head, her silver hair fluttered behind her head under the pressure of the wind brought by her palms, rattling. He stared at the huge golden palm, with nebula in his eyes, and the corners of his mouth gradually widened. Yo! Tathagata palm! Ha 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 ha! While laughing, he stretched out his right hand, with the palm facing up, facing the oncoming huge palm, and raised it above his head. It was like an ant facing the leg trampled down by an elephant. Instead of retreating, he wanted to defeat it. Like an elephant, it is so overreaching and arrogant. However, Sorata is not an ant, and the giant hand is not an elephant. Although Sorata's body seemed too small for the giant hand, in terms of momentum, it was just the opposite. Well, Lokdal, this could not be your last hole card. Sorata's eyes followed the arm of the giant hand down, and looked under the sand. That gesture didn't care about the giant hand above his head. Boom, when the giant hand and Sorata's tiny hand met, there was a shocking collision. The shockwave dissipated. Common knowledge that Sorata was dumped into the sand didn't happen. I saw Sorata standing firmly in place. He didn't raise his head, as if what he was holding was not a giant hand covering the sky, but a large cotton flower. His whole body exuded a relaxed atmosphere. Advertisement, don't underestimate people, kid, rumble. The arm continued to rise, and in the bunker in front of Sorata, as the arm rose, another giant hand rose up. This time the giant hand did not slap Sorata, but lay on the left side of the bunker and pushed down hard. With the sound of boom, a huge head emerged from the sandpit. The moment the head was exposed, an astonishing aura rose up. This was not Conqueror's hockey, but the aura and oppression brought by the Titan itself. The head turned, facing Sorata, and opened its eyes. Woo 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 woo. Two whirlwinds appeared in front of it out of thin air, and the whirlwind rolled the yellow sand all over the sky, sweeping towards Sorata. Well, interesting. Sorata raised her head, staring at the pupils of the head through the dust. These are not human eyes. The pupils of the huge head were full of indifference, ruthlessness, and arrogance. Yes, that is arrogance. This guy has become like this, can't he really regard himself as a god? On the right hand of Sorata's giant hand, a flowing, pinkish armament hockey wrapped around his palm in an instant. He pushed his palm upwards. Bump, bounced the giant hand directly. Looking at the two sandstorms approaching quickly, he raised his leg forward, retracted his right hand, and then slapped the sandstorm in front of him, as if he was slapping a mosquito. Puff, Sorata's hand is small for a sandstorm, but in front of Sorata's palm, the sandstorm was really like a mosquito, and it was wiped out by his palm with one slap. Sorata stood there, raised her head, met Titan's eyes, and said with a smile, Lokdar, I heard that when you were young, you had a 50-50 fight with a fierce man named Bullet in New World. Could it be that you just got married with this match? That guy hit it? Bullet. Advertisement thinking appeared in Titan's eyes, then he thought of something, and laughed loudly at Sorata. Hey, ha 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 ha. That guy is really strong, but I'm not weak either. As he said, his left hand, which was bounced off by Sorata earlier, was propped on the left side of his head, and then he used both hands hard. In a burst of bang, a huge figure rose up from the giant bunker. The Golden Titan is covered in golden armor and a golden helmet on his head. He is over 100 meters tall. Just standing there makes people feel the pressure from the bottom of their hearts. Titan lowered his head and raised his right hand. Under Titan's right hand, a pillar of sand gradually rose, gradually condensing into a huge spear. Titan grasped the spear with his right hand, turned his head to stare at Sorata, and said indifferently, "Silver hair, since you don't want me to go, then you can be buried with this kingdom in this boundless desert." He has already decided that as long as Sorata is driven away, he will destroy the kingdom, and then slowly find what he wants. As he spoke, he put all his strength into his hands and kept pushing the tip of the gun upwards. "If you only have this strength, I think you should die early. I don't have time to play with you anymore." The shockwave went from between Sorata's fingertips and the tip of the huge spear to the surroundings, and then rolled up dust, which quickly dispersed to the surroundings like a 12th level gale. The second wave of shockwave formed, blowing up a bigger storm, and swept it around. Sorata turned her head, stared into Titan's eyes, and said mockingly, "Hey, is this the only power?" "Oh," he stretched out his right hand, clenched his palm into a fist, and then stretched out his index finger. Armament hockey wrapped his entire arm, and then stabbed at the tip of the huge spear. Titan stared at Sorata and said loudly, "I admit, I am indeed not your opponent, but if you want to beat me easily, then you may be really naive." As he said that, he raised the spear, leaned back slightly, aimed the spear point at Sorata, then pushed down with his right hand, and stabbed fiercely at Sorata with the spear. Bump! Sorata raised his head and looked at the huge spear that was coming towards him like a shooting star, with the flashing fire at the tip of the spear. Saying that, Titan's right hand snapped at the void. And the spear in Titan's hand, like a shattered stone, shattered directly with a click sound. "Don't be too arrogant, brat. Go to hell." Boom. Although the wind and sand is big, it has no effect on the center and the two sides of the war. The spear that was broken just now was restored to its original state after a gust of wind and sand made up for it. After Sorata finished speaking, he quickly retracted his index finger, then retracted his right hand, and then punched the tip of the gun quickly. Chapter 123. He panicked. He stared at Sorata, raising his spear again. "Know why I can fight that bullet guy?" As he spoke, he leaned back slightly, and then moved forward with his right hand, but this time it was different from the last time. This time he directly threw the spear in his hand at Sorata. Without waiting for the spear to leave, he stretched out his hand to grab the void on the right again. In the wind and sand, weapons that were the same as the spears he threw continuously formed around his body. He grabbed a spear and threw it at Sorata a second time with the same movement. Sorata raised his head, looking at the spear that was stabbing at him quickly. A trace of impatience flashed in his eyes. He stretched out his right hand, slapped it to the left, and slapped the tip of the spear precisely with his palm. The force redirected the spear, thrusting it through Sorata's left shoulder and into the sand just to his left. He then bent his legs slightly and jumped up. Boom. Easily dodged the second spear thrown by the Titan. Then his body sank and landed on the shaft of the spear. He raised his head and stared at Titan reaching out to grab the spear for the third time. The impatience in his eyes turned into indifference. "You be asterisk 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 D. There's no end to it. This thing is completely useless to me. You just want to PS me off like that. Do you want to die early?" So, as he spoke, he held Zhang Kong's scabbard with his left hand, touched the handle of Zhang Kong's knife with his right hand, and then grasped it firmly. He stared at Titan's head. A murderous intent came out of thin air. The melodious sound of the saber resounded throughout the entire world, causing the whirling wind around it to pause for a moment. Following the sound of the knife was a huge crescent-shaped, silver-gray slash. Slashing upwards at an angle, with a puff, it easily cut off the spear in Titan's hand, cut off Titan's hand, cut off Titan's head, and then disappeared at the end of the sky behind Titan's head. "It's useless. Goo. Ha 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 ha." Sorata's figure was imprinted in the giant indifferent pupils of the Titan, and a burst of laughter came from the big mouth of the severed head. "As long as I'm in this boundless desert, no one can kill me." As he spoke, Titan's head, hands, and even the spear he was holding were all quickly restored to their original state in a gust of wind and sand. "Don't you want to know, why should I have a 50-50 with that bullet guy?" Titan looked at Sorata, and once again raised the spear in his hand. "Of course it is because of my invincible body, which I call the god of the desert." "Gee, ha 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 ha. How about it, enough hockey, advertisement." The Titan laughed loudly, and quickly stabbed at Sorata with the spear in his hand. "So it's because of this." Sorata raised his head and looked at the Titan with a red light in his eyes, ignoring the oncoming spear. "This guy is more difficult to find in this Titan's body than hiding in the desert. Even if observation hockey has cultivated to a very high level, without his special ability, he still can't find this guy. No wonder this guy is 50-50 with anyone. As long as this guy wants to leave, there are really not many people who can keep him. If he hadn't awakened the special observation hockey, and his spiritual power endowed him with unparalleled penetrating power, even if he was far away, he would have nothing to do with this guy. You must know that the general knowledge color, even the top-level knowledge color, cannot pass through the thick stratum and perceive the things hidden under the ground. Of course, if within the scope of his space domain, let alone clock doll, even if a real god is coming, he can detect it. He can find K-Log by virtue of observation hockey plus spiritual power, and he can also find it by virtue of the space field. So, where is Wong Luffy? Boom! he stretched out his right hand to slap away the oncoming spear, looked at the Titan's head, and thought for a while. Is there really a protagonist aura? The red light in his eyes was even brighter, and his eyes turned downward, stopping at Titan's chest. I want to know if this guy really has the fatal weakness of fear of water, just catch it. Found me. Lokdar, who was hiding in the Titan's chest, looked at Sorata's blue pupils staring straight at him, and his smile froze on his face. How is this possible? He stared at Sorata and shook his head. It must have been a random look. That's it. Lokdal nodded, and his body sank down, stopping in Actually's stomach. Okay. He raised his head and looked outside again. His body froze, the smile on his face disappeared completely, and his whole face became stiff. I saw Sorata's gaze, staring straight at Titan's belly, staring at him. This guy is really looking at him. His stiff face came to life, and then a blush quickly climbed, and he twisted. The Titan outside, staring at Sorata, showed emotions other than indifference for the first time. He opened his mouth wide and shouted at Sorata. Who the hell are you? What kind of monster? Why, can you find me, At this time, Lokdal was completely panicked and completely crazy. Advertisement: if Sorata was able to find him in the desert, it could also be made sense with super powerful knowledge and special perception, then he is now in the desert god created by his fruit ability. If you can find him here, then it is not a simple observation hockey, which can be explained. You must know that with his incomparable concealment skills, and his invincible and invincible body, he is based in the new world and dares to compete with anyone. Even Bullet, who is known as the descendant of the devil, had to split with him 50-50. Even Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, who was known as the strongest in the world, had no choice but to let him go after he was defeated. Can he really fight these two one-on-one with strength? Of course not. Instead, relying on this invincible concealment skill. As long as he is in the desert god created by this fruit ability, no one can find his real body. So what about armament hockey? So what about observation hockey? Boom, he doesn't want to play with this guy anymore. It's over, but this guy's desert god is not enough to see in front of him. He stared at the spear above his head, the nebula in his eyes flashed, and the space field expanded instantly. To be honest, this guy's body, the god of the desert, is really powerful. As long as he can't find this guy's body, he can be said to be immortal. Why are you so nervous all of a sudden? Go away. Don't be so self-righteous, kid. But now, Sorata was able to find his real body from the god of the desert. How could he not be angry or panic? The rapidly expanding space domain snapped off the spear in an instant, and then shot towards Titan's head with the fragments of the broken spear. After fighting for such a long time, he couldn't understand the gap between him and Sorata. Sorata tilted his head, staring at Titan's belly. His eyes passed through the thick layer of sand on Titan's belly, and stared at the real body of Clockadar hidden inside. Sorata withdrew her gaze and looked at the top of her head, frowning slightly. If you can't find him, you can only be consumed to death by his desert god and his invincible recovery ability. Titan raised his head to the sky and roared, then grabbed a spear with both hands, and stabbed at Sorata. As long as this guy finds his real body, he may not be able to take this guy's blow. Well, isn't it just to find your body? Chapter 124. Hey, it turns out that you guys are really restrained by water. Sorata withdrew her gaze and stared at Titan's belly. The body disappeared. Where did it go? Lokdar's pupils were wide open, staring outside, staring at the seat where Sorata was standing. A trace of panic flashed in the depths of the blood-red pupils. He knows what it is. That is Silverhair's famous stunt, teleportation, also known as space movement. In the eyes of countless big shots, Sorata's horror is not his swordsmanship like a great swordsman, but his elusive teleportation. What are you looking for? In front of Titan's belly, Sorata's figure condensed into shape. He stared at the sand wall in front of him, with the corners of his mouth upturned, and teasingly said, "Did you come out by yourself, or I will go in and catch you out?" Lokdal stared at Sorata, who could already be said to be standing in front of him, pupils towards the center, ultimate constricted. Silence. Ultimate silence. What, won't you come out? Then I'll come in by myself. Sorata stared at Lokadar, eyes full of mockery. He stepped on the void, and the space field unfolded. Moving forward, a hole was automatically opened in the stomach of the Titan, allowing Sorata to easily walk in. Can actually control the desert god created by his fruit ability. The moment the Sorata field unfolded, Clockadar felt that he had lost control of the part of the desert god's stomach. It felt as if a piece of Titan's stomach had been cut off suddenly, and as Sorata advanced, the cut area was gradually increasing. I can't wait any longer. Even if I really can't escape, I can't wait here to die. Lokadar stared at Sorata outside, and his body sank rapidly. He wanted to go back to the desert to fight for the last chance of survival. He doesn't want to die yet. This guy is a monster stronger than Whitebeard. When he faced Whitebeard at his peak, he never faced Sorata with such powerlessness and panic. Hey, you guys still want to run? Sorata stopped in his tracks, looked down, and then quickly drew Zonkong, armament hockey with a pink luster, wrapped around Zonkong's blade in an instant. Facing the Titan in front of him, he swiped twice. Two equally huge crescent-shaped slashes quickly slashed across Titan's stomach. Titan's upper body flew upwards with a boom, and the lower body stopped in place, leaving only the middle piece, which was still in the sky. Armament hockey of the highest rank. Lockheeder's body stopped inside the Titan's body in the middle. He could use his body to catch Kuina's arm slash, but he didn't dare to catch Sorata's slash. First of all, he doesn't have observation hockey, so he can't be elementalized in advance, unless his whole body is elementalized from the beginning, but even if his whole body is elementalized, his body can still be hit by Sorata's armed color slash. The damage has to be discounted. But even if it is discounted, Sorata's highest level armed color slash is not something he can use his body to forcefully receive. So as a last resort, he could only stop here, waiting for Sorata's arrival. He knows, he can't run away. In the dark sand pile, a beam of light fell from the sky, and then the entire circular sand pile was split into two halves. K-Lock Doll looked at the slash that brushed past his body, the hairs all over his body stood on end. From this slash, he felt the breath of death. It wasn't fatal, but it was definitely felt. Although this guy's slash is not as strong as Hawkeye's slash, it is still an existence that his body cannot face. Advertisement. Well, didn't I tell you to come out obediently? Why are you disobedient? Now it's over. I caught you, so I won't let you go so easily. With a voice full of banter, Sorata's figure appeared. Sorata appeared silently outside the sandpile cut in half. He stared at the golden yellow human-shaped quicksand inlaid in the sand in front of him, and said teasingly, "Clockadar, tell me, what should I do with you, okay?" "Whatever." Lockadar stared at Sorata. The blood in his eyes gradually disappeared, and his pupils became clear again. He has accepted his fate, not because he doesn't want to resist, but because he can't resist. Because since Sorata stood in front of him, he found that except for his head, the rest of his body could not move at all, and he couldn't even control his elemental body. He felt that there was a huge space around here, and the owner of the space was Sorata in front of him. "You guys are hiding deep enough, and you can actually control the space." Lockadar stared at Sorata and asked calmly, "Hey, Brad, can you let me have a cigarette?" He didn't want to beg for mercy, because it would be of no use except to make him more embarrassed in front of Sorata, a junior. And no matter what, he is also a well-known pirate with a certain reputation in this world, and he really can't do such a thing as begging for mercy. "Smokes?" Sorata looked at Lockadar, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, and said with a smile, "Ha ha 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 ha. If you want to smoke, go to hell to smoke." After the disappearance stopped, Sorata tore off the gourd of wine around his waist, raised his head and took a sip, and then said to Lockadar, "Actually, I came here mainly to verify one thing about you." "What's up?" Lock Doll wasn't mad that Sorata didn't give him a cigarette. He was about to die, and he didn't want to think about anything else. He wants to know now. Silver hair. "Okay." Lockadar raised his head, met Sorata's eyes, and asked calmly, "Can I ask you a question?" "Say." Sorata looked at Lockadar with a hint of curiosity on his face. "What is your purpose? I don't believe that you, a pirate, came to this island just to defeat me and save this country." He bowed his head in thought for a moment, then raised his head and said to Sorata, "And you also snatched Robin from me. Nico Robin, don't say you don't know who that woman is." "Okay, I know." Sorata nodded, and then asked, "And then?" "Then, goo, ha 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 ha." Lockdoll stared at Sorata, and suddenly laughed out loud. "You really know Robin, then your purpose must be the same as mine, ha 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 ha." "Okay." Sorata nodded, and said to Lockadar, "There are reasons and evidence. If I didn't know my purpose, I would have been guessed by you." "Your purpose?" Lockdoll stopped laughing and stared at Sorata with doubts on his face. "Yup." Sorata looked at Lockadar, opened her mouth, showing her white teeth. "I didn't come here for any historical text, nor for some ancient weapon, nor for world domination." Advertisement. The more Sorata said, the eyes of Lockdoll opened wider and wider, and at the end, he laughed even more. "You also said that you don't have the same purpose as me. Are you cheating ghosts? Ha 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 ha. Then tell me, what is your purpose?" Sorata put away the smile on her face, stared into Locke's eyes, and said indifferently, "I said, I came to be a hero, to practice the justice in my heart, and I said I came to love the old man in a tavern in Luma. I came here with a glass of wine, and I said, I came here to let the people of this country enjoy the beautiful rain freely. I don't know, you believe it or not." Lockheeder's laughter died away, and he stared at Sorata like he was staring at a madman. "You mean it?" "Okay," Sorata nodded, "it really can't be true." Seeing Sorata's affirmative answer, Lockheeder's calm face showed anger again. If he was killed by a pirate, he could still face it calmly, but he was killed by a fake pirate, a righteous man. Pirates, dreaming of being a hero and killing pirates, this is something he can't stand. He leaned his head forward and yelled at Sorata. "You be asterisk 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 D. You be asterisk 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 D. Do you know what a pirate is?" Pirate is not a game for children who only know how to play house. To do your justice, why don't you be a marine? You be asterisk 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 D. You be asterisk 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 D. Cut off Lousy's dream just for such a ridiculous reason. Break Lousy's dream, brat. Seeing that Lock had yelled enough, Sorata said, "Have you yelled enough? If it's enough, let's go. I hope you will be a good person in the next life." Lockadar stared at Sorata, struggling violently, but it was useless. Now he couldn't even move his head, he could only stare at Sorata with eyes full of anger and unwillingness. Of course, in the depths of those pupils, there was still a touch of panic and fear that was hard to detect. No one is not afraid of death, no matter how nice and brave the words are. When that moment really comes, they will still be uncontrollably panicked and fearful. Don't worry, it will be fast, no pain, no itching. Sorata lowered his head, slowly drew Zhang Kong out, and then held Zan Kong in front of him. He also has another purpose, which is to see if this guy is really afraid of water. Sorata raised the wine gourd with his left hand, raised his head and took a sip into his mouth, but he didn't swallow it, but lowered his head, and opened his mouth to Zhang Kong who was lying in front of him. Puff, the water mist filled the air, and immediately Zhang Kong's blade was covered with water droplets. Not enough. Sorata stared at Zhang Kong, then controlled the space domain, gathered the wine floating around, and wrapped it around Zhang Kong. He raised his head and stared at K-Lock Doll's neck, his eyes flashed coldly, then without hesitation, he turned the blade around and swung the blade at K-Lock Doll quickly. Puff, the wine on the cut surface was quickly stained red with blood. And Clock-Eater's body, in a convulsion, immediately released the elementalization and returned to its original state. On his neck, a line of blood was continuously oozing out. Sorata stared at Clock-Eater's neck, then looked up to meet his fading eyes. With a downward swing of his right hand, the water on the knife was swung away, and the blood on the knife was also swung away. Ding, then put the knife back into the sheath, and the figure disappeared in place. As the Titan's body fell, a sigh came from the air. Hey, it turns out that you are really restrained by water. Chapter 125 Rain, Heavy Rain. I don't know if it's God's will. At the moment of Clock-Eater's death, a thunderbolt resounded throughout Alabasta. It was as if the whole world was cheering that the evil man who had plagued Alabasta was finally dead. Then there was a gust of cold wind, which quickly blew into Alabasta, adding a touch of coolness to the dry air in Alabasta. Following the cold wind came thick clouds covering the sky and the sun. Is it going to rain? Alabasta, Juba, Rapeseed, etc. Alabasta towns that have not been destroyed by drought, the people in the towns all rushed out of the room after hearing the thunder, and looked up at the sky. I saw a white lightning that spread across, as if to split the entire sky, across the entire sky of Alabasta. At the end of the white lightning, a dark black cloud that kept rolling, with countless tiny white lightning, was coming towards Alabasta quickly. After a while, it covered the entire sky of Alabasta. Boom, with the first thunder, of course there will be a second, a third, and countless more. Rumble. Countless lightning bolts, just like white snakes, continuously strayed in the clouds. Tick, 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 it's really raining. I don't know whose loud voice it was, it immediately woke up countless people who were staring blankly at the sky. I saw them tearing off their headscarves and hats, opening their hands, raising their heads, and staring excitedly at the raindrops falling from the sky. As the raindrops fell more and more densely, and became bigger and bigger, in the end, the whole world seemed to be shrouded in rainwater. It was noon at this time, and countless people who were taking a nap were awakened by the shocking cheers outside. They looked out of the window and couldn't tell whether it was raining or the scene of entering the water. They were stunned, and then came back to their senses. It is the joy of splashing heaven. Some of them wept with joy, some laughed out loud, and some yelled crazily. Use various emotions to express your joy at this time. Countless people rushed out of the room, regardless of whether they would get sick or catch a cold afterwards. They only knew that this rain of life, came so timely and so late. Timely because when they are about to move, the rain comes, so they don't have to give up. They have lived in their home here all their lives. It was late because, during the drought of more than a year, countless people did not survive the drought and left here. Some lucky people went through the desert and found other oases that have not yet dried up to continue living, and more the others were buried forever in this arid desert. Love Luma. Tavern. At this time, there was no one in the tavern. Because the tavern was closed a day ago. Hearing the countless cheers outside and the loud frolic of the children, the tavern owner sitting on the old wooden chair by the window stretched out his hand and wiped his wet eyes. He looked up at the picture of raindrops falling on the window, as if he had seen the most beautiful picture in the world, and he was suddenly fascinated by it. The boss, who came back to his senses, took out a pipe from his waist and put it in his mouth, and then took out the lighter. Crack. The flames rose. Advertisement. The faint orange-yellow flame reflected a large circle of light in this dim tavern. Although the fire was faint, it also illuminated the window of the tavern, and at the same time illuminated the smiling face of the boss. The boss put the pipe on the flame, smashed it, and smoked the cigarette. Then leaning back on the chair, the whole person completely relaxed. Ding, the flames disappeared. The boss put down the lighter, smoked, and slowly closed his eyes, listening to the sound of rain on the window, and fell asleep leisurely. For more than a year, he has never relaxed like today. Alabasta is saved, Aluma is saved, and the tavern does not need to be closed. Very nice. Juba, outside of town, bang. Bang, bang, the old man dug the sand here day after day, trying to overcome the sand and make the oasis of Juba reappear. At this moment, a thunderclap made the old man stop what he was doing. He was familiar with this voice. For more than a year, he had dreamed of hearing this voice. Woo! This time it was not a sandstorm, but a very comfortable cold wind. Duo Tuo looked at the rolling clouds in the sky, and the hoe in his hand fell to the ground with a slap. He looked at the sky, his whole body trembling constantly, and his eyes burst out with infinite light. Then the whole person seemed to be stupid, and kept muttering in his mouth. I'll say, it must be raining in Alabasta, and His Majesty must not be using dancing powder. As long as it rains, as long as it rains, as long as it rains, Alabasta will definitely return to its original state, and Yuba will definitely return to the original beautiful Yuba. As he spoke, a line of tears flowed down the corners of his eyes, onto Dodo's old face, then gathered on his chin, and dripped down towards the ground. Just then, the rain came as expected. Whoa 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 whoa. The rain and Dodo's tears merged and wet the whole of Juba together, making this beautiful city of Alabasta, which was not established for a long time, come alive for the first time after experiencing countless sandstorms. On the other side of the Sandora River, Kosa had just laid across the River of Life in Alabasta with a large army of rebels. Just when Kosha directed the rest of the people to cross the river quickly, the same thunderclap attracted everyone's attention. Advertisement looking at the thick clouds that covered the sky and the sun, no matter whether they had crossed the river or not, they all raised their heads in unison. Their eyes were in disbelief at first, then the corners of their mouths widened, and their whole people gradually became excited. Countless people shouted excitedly, "Cloud, cloud, cloud, thunderstorm with cloud. It's rain, it must be rain, it must be raining, ha 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 ha. No one wants to fight, no one wants to leave home, and no one wants to join the bloody rebel army. But there is no way, without rain, in this kingdom full of deserts, if they, their families, do not resist, they will all die. Compared with life, fighting and leaving home seems so insignificant. Now that it's raining, they don't have to go to war, they can go back to their hometown and continue to live their original life. I think, with such an ending, no one will be unhappy or excited." Hush. The rain extinguished the hatred in the hearts of the rebels, and also extinguished their doubts about their king. Countless people faced the direction of Albari under the rain, and said to their king in their hearts, "I'm sorry." Kosha, one of the members of the San group, is also one of Vivi's playmates in the San group when he was a child. In the rebel army, Gaibi served as Kosa's right-hand man. "Drive the camel and come to Kosa," he asked Kosha excitedly. "Kosha, what shall we do next?" In fact, he knew the answer in his heart, but Kosha had always been their leader, so he couldn't help but ask. Now that there is water, who will rebel? Thinking of his father's face gradually aging because of Yuba over the past year, his eyes were once again covered with mist. But these are all personal choices, and they are all people who want to save the country. In fact, there is no right or wrong. Of course, no matter how much he loved him before, now he will blame himself even more than other people. If it wasn't for his love, he wouldn't have decided to disband the rebel army the moment it rained, and go back to Yuba to rebuild Yuba with his father. In fact, they don't need to say it. In fact, no one loves this country more than him and his father. If it weren't for their love, they would not have come to Yuba, and established Yuba from scratch to become an important trading center in the West. Because the root cause of their rebellion is actually water. Kosha withdrew his gaze from Gaibi and turned his head to stare in Yuba's direction. He wished he could go back to Yuba immediately and say to his father, "I'm sorry." As one of the people who followed Kosha the longest, they have been together since childhood, of course he knows what Kosha thinks. As Dodo said, as long as it rains, then all this is no longer a problem. Kosha lowered his head, took off the brown sunglasses on his face, and then reached out to wipe the water stains on his face that he didn't know whether it was rain or tears. Then he turned his head to Guy and said with a smile, "What do you think?" Guy looked at Kosha for a while, then turned around and went to inform. He really shouldn't doubt the king. If it weren't for his love, he wouldn't be so desperate to save the country. How to do?